Chapter 11:20. After Dean promised Zhang Lanxin, he didn't delay and went outside the company building. Soon he saw a group of people wandering on the street wearing plain clothes. These people were civilians with poor living conditions. Some of them hadn't even bathed for many days. They were sweaty and mixed with a strange smell. Dean had to get close to them to smell it, but his sense of smell was so sensitive that he slightly frowned. These people were sitting under the shade of trees on the roadside. They seemed to know that the Randy company was not easy to deal with, so they didn't approach the company. They just waited on the roadside. No wonder the company's robot security couldn't expel them. Although the consortium was powerful and could easily kill a few people, they obviously didn't have the intention to kill a large number of poor people for Zhang Lanxin, a researcher. Moreover, Zhang Lanxin didn't report to the company, so she could only suffer. Dean glanced at them. There were more than 40 people. He didn't immediately go forward. Instead, he used the communicator to contact his secretary, Zhu Ying, and asked him to transfer the money to his account. After looking at the amount of the remittance, he walked toward the group of people under the shade of the street. Seeing someone coming over, the 7 people under the shade suddenly showed vigilance. They stopped fanning themselves, slowly stood up and looked at Dean vigilantly. The other money collectors under the shade of the surrounding trees also stood up and stared at Dean with a bit of nervousness on their faces. "Are you all looking for Zhang Lanxin for money?" Dean faintly looked at the people in front of him. As they heard him mention Zhang Lanxin, the tension on the faces of the people around him suddenly disappeared and turned into anger. Among the 7 people, a middle-aged man with a strong figure stepped out. He seemed to be the representative of the crowd. He said angrily, "Who are you? Who are you to Zhang Lanxin?" Dean saw their aggressive attitude and said with a smile, "What? Do you want to behave atrociously in the Randy company? Don't you know where this place is?" The middle-aged man coldly snorted. "Who said we are going to cause trouble here? We are just waiting for someone and passing by. Why? Are people not allowed to stand on the roadside?" Dean smiled and said, "Don't get excited. I'm here to give you money on behalf of Zhang Lanxin's mother-in-law. She knows that you are in trouble, so she specifically asked me to come over to help you get through the difficulties." The people heard the words and their faces were obviously relieved. "Who are you to Zhang Lanxin? Her son?" The middle-aged man looked at Dean. His face gradually turned cold. "We are all waiting for money. There are so many people. Do you think you can get so much money? How much do you need?" Dudian smiled. The middle-aged man and the people around him looked at each other. At this time, the others slowly came over and surrounded Dean. If an ordinary person saw this scene, they would think that they were robbers and would inevitably panic. But Dean looked calm. He just quietly watched them discuss. He even saw that the other side seemed to think that his attitude was good. Moreover, he was young and ready to ask for more. He could clearly see the winks that they were secretly giving him. "We have a total of 43 people here. Some of us need money for treatment, some of our houses have collapsed, and some of our sons have died. All of us need money. We need at least 100,000 or 200,000 for each of us. Add it up to 8 or 9 million. Do you have enough?" The middle-aged man looked at Dudian and said in a cold voice. Dean slightly narrowed his eyes. 200,000 federal coins is equivalent to the income of a small rich family for half a year. You really dare to ask for it? The crowd saw that he seemed to be unwilling, and suddenly began to talk. 200,000 is a lot for us, but what is it for rich people like you? Zhang Lanxin is an expert of Landy Company. I don't know how much money she earns every year. How can she not take out such a small amount of money? Do you think we are fools? Yes, you are too cold-blooded. We are so poor that we can't even eat. We are reluctant to give a little. You have so much money. Isn't it given to you by us? Isn't your food and clothing made by us commoners? You can save a little money, but it is enough for us to use for a lifetime. Dean smiled and was indifferent to the noise of the crowd. He didn't even blink his eyelids even though the spittle was flying. The middle-aged man didn't expect the young man to be so calm. Knowing that it was meaningless to condemn him, he immediately raised his hand to signal everyone to be quiet. Soon everyone stopped. Zhang Lanxin can earn so much money just by going on a TV show. We don't need much. If you can't give us the money, then let Zhang Lanxin come out and tell us. I don't believe that she has no money, the well-built middle-aged man said coldly. Dean smiled softly and said, You are right. We can still take out this money. Isn't it just 8 or 9 million? I have 10 million here. As long as it can help everyone. The crowd was a little stunned. They didn't expect that Dean would agree after just a few words. For a moment they were a little embarrassed, but soon they thought of the money in their hands. Their eyes suddenly became eager. They stared at Dean and wanted to grab it themselves, but the rule of law of the Federation was deep in their bones. They didn't dare to really do it. They just stared at the communicator in Dean's hand. I said, Grandma Lanxin is a good person. How can she be reluctant to give money? If she gave it earlier, we wouldn't have to waste time waiting here for so long. I'm dizzy from the sun. That's true. Little brother, give the money. Everyone urged with enthusiasm. Dean raised his hand slightly. After everyone was quiet, he said, Don't worry, everyone. It's hard for you to come here to ask for money. I'll give you the money. In addition, I'll call a few cars to send you back. I hope you can live a good life after you go back. Don't let Grandma Lanxin down. Yes, we will. Everyone agreed again and again. Dean immediately entered the company's internal authority on the communicator and mobilized a magnetic train. It was said to be a train, but it was slightly wider and longer than the old bus. The interior space was more comfortable. After everyone got on the train, Dean also went on the train. He set the train on autopilot and chose a route. Soon, the train started smoothly. Where's the money? Do you want to go with us? The middle-aged man saw that Dean also got on the train. He didn't look good and seemed to feel that something was wrong. Dean raised his hand slightly and said in a loud voice, Everyone, I'm going to transfer the money to everyone now. Sit down one by one. It's not good to mess up the order. Otherwise, don't blame me if someone doesn't get the money. The effect of these words was very good. There were some people who were still bewildered but also sat down. Dean immediately began to transfer the money according to the seat. Everyone saw that he really transferred the money. They were relieved and excited. It didn't take long for everyone on the train to receive Dean's transfer. Dean sat in the front of the train after the transfer was completed. He looked out of the window at the scenery. The speed of the train was very fast. It had already left the wealthy area along the city track and came to a remote town on the outskirts. Even a large Federation city like the first Vow City had barren areas, just that there weren't many of them. The train continued to move through 2 remote towns along the way. My house is here. Stop the train. Someone saw that the train was about to leave the town and quickly shouted. Dean didn't pay attention to it. When the man shouted even louder, Dean said, First send the people far away and then send the people near. Don't worry, just take it as a ride. While he was talking, the train had left the town. The man saw this and was a little angry, but he could only sit down silently. After the train drove out of the town, it came to the suburban road. There were 2 roads. One road had painted signs on it, while the other road looked a bit dilapidated. However, the train was heading towards the dilapidated road. At this time, many people had noticed that something was wrong. The middle-aged man stood up and glared at Dean. Where are you taking us? Dean also stood up and turned around. He looked at the crowd and said, Where are we going? Of course, to send you to die. As soon as the words came out, the whole train boiled. Everyone stood up and shouted in excitement. Some of them accused Dean. Some of them even cursed loudly. Several young people who were closest to Dean stood up and reached out to grab Dean. They wanted to hit him. Dean slightly lifted his leg and gently kicked the chest of the person in front of him. Only the sound of ribs breaking could be heard. The young man knocked down the people behind him and made them look like a turtle. They couldn't get up for a long time. "What the hell do you want to do?" the middle-aged man angrily shouted. Dean indifferently said, I'm sending you to die. You dare to kill? Do you want to die with us? If something happens to us, you won't live either. There is no law. Don't think that you are great because you are rich. Kill? Dean faintly smiled as he heard the angry shouts of the crowd. Of course, it is great to be rich. Otherwise, why do you work so hard to make money? Do you really think that your life is valuable? Although the law will protect you, but the law is also based on the words of the people. What do you think you are? Hearing his words, many people were a little flustered. After all, there were still people who were in awe of the powerful and upper-class people. The middle-aged man's face changed as he sneered. You have killed so many of our people. Do you think you won't be on the news? You won't be able to escape the death penalty. Then I don't need you dead people to do it. Dean smiled. The middle-aged man seemed to see that Dean didn't mean to intimidate him. He couldn't help but soften his tone. I don't want the money. I will return the money to you. Stop the car. Chapter 11:21. Seeing Dean's indifferent expression, many people were scared and begged for mercy. We have no enmity with you. Why do you want to kill us? I beg you to let me go. I don't want the money. I'll give it back to you and I won't trouble you anymore. Let me off, please. The middle-aged man saw that begging for mercy didn't work, so he roared, Don't think that killing people is not against the law because you are from a big company. There are so many of us. If something happens to us, no one can save you. Ignorant ants. Dean smiled indifferently. When you forced an old man to give you money, you already deserve to die. There are few good people in this world. There are even fewer good people who have the ability to help others. Unfortunately, the so-called poor and lazy people like you are ignorant. You can't restrain your greedy nature, so there are fewer good people. So you will meet evil people like me. Unfortunately, when you meet me, there is no turning back. The middle-aged man roared, Go to hell. Everyone, let's kill him first. Under his roar, many young men reacted from the panic and immediately pounced on Dean with ferocious faces. Dean looked indifferent. He lifted his foot and kicked the man. Someone approached from the side and was slapped in the face. His whole body turned around like a spinning top and crashed into the crowd. The people behind were frightened by his fierce strength. They stared in disbelief. Dean smiled indifferently. He raised his hand and slapped the automatic navigation system of the train. Electric sparks appeared and the navigation system was smashed. Then he jumped and hit the metal plate of the train above his head. He stood on the edge of the hole. No one had ever seen such a terrifying, inhuman power. All of them were dumbfounded, their faces filled with shock. No one knew who suddenly shouted. The middle-aged man woke up and saw the end of the road in front of the train. There was a collapsed fault. His pupils shrank and he screamed in horror. Dean jumped off the train. The navigation system of the train was damaged, but it continued to move forward without slowing down. After he jumped off the train, it rushed straight toward the highway fault and crashed. Dean slowly walked to the edge of the fault and saw the train rolling from the landslide under the fault to the cliff 100 meters below. The body of the train was already smoking. His eyes flashed, but he didn't go up to stab it. Instead, he floated away. The headquarters of the Terrace Financial Group. Located in the center of the city, it covered an area of tens of millions of square meters. It was the king of luxury houses. One had to know that every inch of land in the city center was worth an inch of gold. Even a residential house of 100 square meters would cost millions of federal dollars. What was the concept of tens of millions of square meters? It was equivalent to the core of Dujon City, and it was all included in the garden of the Terrace Financial Group's headquarters. Just this piece of land alone was worth hundreds of billions. Even the federal government in the capital city had moved to a second-tier area. This was the domineering nature of the four consortiums. Money was perhaps just a number to them. After all, the Terrace Financial Group was responsible for printing money for the Federation. Money? No one knew how much money the Terrace Financial Group had, but they knew that the Terrace Financial Group's businesses were spread throughout the Federation. The products produced were sold to millions of households. Whether you were a man or a woman, the elderly or the children, you would use the Terrace Financial Group's products in all aspects. At this moment, in the tallest technology building in the Terrace Financial Group's villa complex, the dim light shrouded every corner of the room. There was only one huge room on the top floor. It was extremely spacious, like a palace, but it was simpler than a palace. There weren't too many luxurious decorations. There were only holes embedded in every corner of the room, emitting a faint light. The floor was not a floor, but a transparent mirror. Dressed in a black and gold robe like that of a priest, Blackaloti slowly walked in from outside the room. His feet stepped on the transparent floor, as if he was walking in midair. Beneath the transparent floor was not the image of the next floor, but a deep and vast darkness. There were specks of light, like the stars in the universe. Blackaloti's body was perfectly straight, but his head was slightly lowered. With every step he took, he would look at the area less than 5 meters in front of his feet, not daring to go any further. He just walked step by step, silently remembering in his heart. When he took the 12th step, he immediately stopped, then bowed slightly, and said in an extremely respectful tone, "Blackaloti greets the core deity. What orders do you have for me?" A young, yet extremely indifferent and condescending tone came from above Blackaloti's head. "That demon has caused trouble again. Go and clean up the mess." Blackaloti was slightly stunned and said doubtfully, "The one that was sent to the Landy Company? He dares to cause trouble instead of staying in the company obediently? He did it on purpose. He wanted to see the bottom line of my tolerance." There was no trace of emotion in the indifferent voice. "Go." Blackaloti's heart tightened as he quickly bowed. "Yes, Lord God." After saying that, he bowed slightly and slowly turned around to leave. Before he left, he glanced in front of him from the corner of his eyes and saw an incomparably dazzling light. It was as if a god was emitting light. He walked out of the room quietly, and when the alloy door slowly closed, he felt that the air was much lighter. He breathed a sigh of relief, and his eyes flickered slightly. He said to himself in his heart, "It's that demon again. Lord God is so concerned about him. What is it for?" Dean casually called a car and went back to the company after entering the town. Dean used his X-ray vision to scan each floor. He found Zhang Lanxin's figure and went straight to the top floor of the laboratory. The door of the laboratory opened as Dean entered and saw Zhang Lanxin, Kong Ji and 4 other experts who were busy with the experiment. They were in a group. Once the project was successful, they would get great fame and benefit. Noticing that someone had come in, many people turned to look. They frowned as they saw Dean, but ignored him and continued to work. Zhang Lanxin put down the chemicals in her hand as she saw Dean come back. She quickly walked over and whispered, "Did they leave?" "All gone." Dean used a different tone when he said gone. Zhang Lanxin didn't hear the difference. She was relieved and quickly asked, "How much did they ask for?" "A lot?" Dean smiled and showed her the transfer form. "It's not much. 200,000 per person. A total of more than 8 million. I can't afford it." "So much?" Zhang Lanxin was a little surprised but soon became annoyed. She lowered her head and sulked. "Grandma Lan Xin, don't take it to heart. It's just a small amount of money. They promised that they won't come again. But Grandma, you don't have to care about these people anymore. There are countless poor people in the Federation. If you can't help them, they will become ungrateful wolves." Zhang Lanxin nodded heavily and said, "I know. I've seen through this matter clearly. I won't do such a stupid thing again. But child, your money. She thought for a moment and solemnly said, I'll return it to you. Dean smiled. We will talk about this later. Grandma, you are busy with the experiment. I won't bother you. Zhang Lanxin felt the dissatisfied eyes of others. She didn't say anything more. Then you can look around here. If there is anything you don't understand, feel free to ask me. I'm going to work. Chapter 11:22. Dean wandered around the laboratory for a moment and then left. He went to an empty laboratory, pulled a chair next to the bookshelf, and flipped through the information inside. With his authority, he could enter these laboratories that were not open at will. Compared to reading carefully in a laboratory where there were people, he could be more casual here. It was just that he could not understand most of the information here. However, he memorized all these formulas. Once he learned the formulas and what the nouns represented, he would be able to master them immediately. He found a notebook and wrote down the things he didn't understand. Then he went to the dining room in advance and ordered a meal. After Zhang Lanxin and the experts from the laboratory came down to eat, Dean immediately ordered a meal. At this time, Zhang Lanxin came to the dining room. She noticed Dean sitting in a conspicuous position under the reminder of Kong Ji. She was stunned for a moment and then directly came over. Little Qin, this time thanks to you. Zhang Lanxin's face was full of gratitude and very sincere. Dean pulled a chair and invited them to sit down, saying, It's a small matter. Grandma Lanxin doesn't need to thank me. I've heard that 9 million is not a small number even for us. These people are really ruthless. They are simply evil wolves. They say that the poor are pitiful, and that there must be something hateful about them. They are absolutely right. Although Kong Ji was old, his tone was filled with righteous indignation like a young man. If Zhang Lanxin didn't tell him that Dudian had shown her the transfer list, he wouldn't have believed that Dudian was telling the truth. He hated the debt collectors even more after he confirmed that Dudian was telling the truth. Dean smiled and didn't deny it. Although 9 million wasn't a big deal to him, he couldn't act too indifferent. After the two ordered dinner, the three of them ate and chatted. Little Qin, I heard that you are studying the experiment and preparing to apply for a research project. If there is anything I can help you with, just tell me. Zhang Lanxin had been looking for an opportunity. After Dean finished dinner, she was afraid that he would leave, so she quickly said. Dean was waiting for this opportunity. Even if she didn't speak, he would take the initiative to speak. He didn't show too much joy, just smiled and said, I do want to apply for a project from the company. It's not that I don't have a task when they send me here, but my qualifications are too shallow, and I don't understand a lot of things, including the words of you experts. I still need to learn. Zhang Lanxin and Kong Ji knew that Dudian was very eager to learn. Zhang Lanxin happily said, I can teach you if you don't understand anything. Yes, you can ask me anything you don't understand, Kong Ji said with a smile in his eyes. He was very optimistic about Dean. Dudian scratched his head. Will I disturb you and waste your energy? It's okay, it's nothing. Zhang Lanxin quickly said, for fear that Dean would refuse and would not be able to find an opportunity to repay. Seeing this, Dean no longer refused, but agreed. In his heart, he said, some people get help from others but covet more help. Some people get a little kindness from others, but feel uncomfortable and try to repay. Unfortunately, such people are only a small part. After the two finished eating, Dean took out his notebook and asked for advice. The two saw Dean write down a lot of things in the notebook and were surprised. They didn't expect Dean to be so diligent. In their hearts, they appreciated him more and were happy to give him guidance. Little Qin, these are not systematic. At your age, you shouldn't have studied as a graduate student, right? Zhang Lanxin looked at the notebook and quickly saw the level of Dean's knowledge. Dean nodded. I just graduated from college. At that time, I only played around and my results were average. Zhang Lanxin smiled and comforted. It's not too late to learn now. I'll teach you from the beginning. Wait for me to go back tonight, and after I finish the experiment tomorrow, you can come to me. Dean was surprised. Thank you, Grandma Lanxian, but Grandma, you are old, don't stay up late. It's okay, I can still eat. Zhang Lanxin laughed. After the two left together, Dean also packed up his things and returned to his residence. Looking at the evening news, he soon found a news about a car crash. The location and the pictures were taken. It was the car that was used for his funeral. Zhang Lanxin will go back in the evening to sort out the study plan for me. She should have no time to pay attention to these news. These experts usually only pay attention to the news in their own industry. Occasionally, when they have free time, they will look at other news. For the time being, there is no need to worry about anything. Moreover, there is no report on the name of the deceased. Dean looked at the news. He only saw the flattened appearance of the train, and the passengers' faces were full of blood, but it was blurred. Dean believed that Zhang Lanxin should not associate it with those debt collectors. Even if she did, it would not matter. From the news, this incident was defined as an accident caused by the train's navigation failure. It seems that the consortium is quite indulgent to me, Dean said in his heart. They know that I am a demon, and that I have killed so many of your people, but they cover for me. They can easily investigate the real reason for the train crash, haha. Dean's eyelids slightly narrowed, flashing a cold light. Although more than 40 people were ordinary civilians, but the Federation was a society ruled by law. It was almost the same as the old era, or even more strict than the old era. Murder? Robbery? All of them would be arrested. There was no underworld in the Federation, only the police. The law was strict. This was a humanistic society. Even if it was a multimillionaire who killed people, they would pay with their life. Occasionally, in the news, rich people would be arrested and sentenced for violating innocent girls. The law protects every citizen, so the debt collectors dared to be so arrogant. As the saying goes, even if you are rich, even if you are powerful, do you dare to kill me? However, standing at the top of the society, the Terrace Consortium gave Dean the answer. Yes, they dare. The murder of more than 40 people was defined as an accident. Dean deliberately didn't kill them, and even deliberately left his fingerprints when he smashed the navigator. It was to test the energy and reaction of the Terrace Consortium. Now it seemed that the Terrace Consortium could cover the sky with one hand in Duyo City. Even the scope was not limited to Duyo City, but more than half of the Federation. The Consortium didn't send anyone to warn me. It seems that this small matter didn't even touch 1/10 of their tolerance. The more tolerance they have, the more they have. They gave me the highest authority so that I can learn a lot of esoteric knowledge. It seems that they are helping me, but if they really want to help me, then they should directly identify themselves, unless there is something difficult to say. From all the phenomena, Dean felt that the goodwill of the Terrace Consortium had little to do with helping him. There must be a purpose. It was late at night while he was thinking. Dean sighed softly. This feeling was like a leaf floating in the sea, and it could be destroyed at any time. He couldn't figure out when the wind would come, but the wind would come eventually. He made up his mind to first learn the knowledge, and then solve the problem of his heart. If it wasn't for the burden of his heart being too low, he felt that his body could erupt with unimaginable power. Perhaps the transformation of his body by Crimson Moon was far beyond Crimson Moon's expectations. If I can erupt with the power of the king, then even if the Terrace Consortium wants to kill me, I should be able to protect myself. The strongest weapon they have, besides nuclear bombs, should be laser weapons. Dean thought in his heart. It should be impossible to use nuclear weapons to attack him. After all, he was in the Federation. It was better to let him go than to use nuclear weapons to destroy a demon. Chapter 11:23. Time flew by. Dean read materials by himself during the day and looked for Zhang Lanxin to tutor him in the evening. Kongji occasionally taught him some obscure biological knowledge. Dean's knowledge level was rapidly improving. Thanks to his photographic memory and diligent self-study, he made rapid progress. Many things were taught by Zhang Lanxin once, but Dean completely mastered them. His amazing IQ made the two old experts speechless. 3 months passed in the blink of an eye. Dean felt that it was almost time, so he applied to the company for the Walking Dead experiment project. Faster than he expected, the company didn't let him wait for long. The project was approved that night. The first batch of investment funds reached 50 million and he was promoted to project director. He could select other experts of the company to participate in the experiment. After the news spread, Dudian immediately became a sweet potato in the eyes of many experts. Although some people were jealous, but on the surface they were still very polite to Dudian, and even did not hesitate to compliment him, hoping to be selected by Dudian and pulled into his experimental project. After all, the first batch of funds for the experimental project was so high. Obviously, the company and the consortium had high hope. Moreover, they heard that Dean's research had not made any progress for many years. Once the experiment was successful, it would absolutely be a shocking work. They would also jump to become top experts and be included in textbooks for hundreds of years. Even if the experiment failed, it would have little impact on them. The main person in charge was Dean. I heard that Qin Mo is the illegitimate son of a board member of the consortium? If he is not an illegitimate son, how can the consortium allow the company to mess around like this? This is not research, it is clearly burning money. A young man in his 20s as the experimental project director, people will laugh to death if they say it out. It's simply nonsense. Previously, the company gave him the highest authority to participate in our experiment. Anyway, he just wants to look at it and doesn't understand anything. Now they actually throw money for him to play. They really treat science as a child's play. It's just a game for the rich. Why do you take it so seriously? Hey, we still do our own experiment. It is estimated that when his experiment fails, it won't be long before he will be transferred by the consortium. Coming here to do the experiment may just be a whim of the other party. Many of the experts in the company with Level 1 authority were discussing this in private. This matter even reached the ears of the ordinary experts, and it became a topic of conversation after a meal. Dean faintly smiled as he heard the discussion. Although these people didn't dare to talk in front of him, but his hearing was so keen that he could cover the entire building. Although the building was soundproof, but his magic marks gave him the ability of extrasensory audiovisual. Even if it was a completely sealed soundproof room, he could still hear it clearly. It's not just you who can't figure out what the consortium is thinking. Even I can't figure it out. Dean smiled in his heart. After the meal, he thought about the names of the experts who would form the experimental project. There were only 4 of them. Zhang Lanxin, Kongji, Chu Huiru and another Chinese man called Malone were the only ones who weren't jealous or ridiculed in the discussions. After receiving Dudian's invitation, the 4 quickly came to the laboratory that Dudian had applied for. Chu Huiru was surprised and asked, Qin Mo, do you want to invite me to participate in your experimental project? Yes, do you want to? Dudian smiled. Chu Huiru thought for a moment. No problem. Anyway, I don't have any experimental project recently. I just want to do some small research. I have time. I don't have any problem, Malone said. Little Qin, both of them are experts in undead research. They have many years of research experience. You have found the right person to find them. But you have invited me and Kongji to participate. We aren't good at this. Zhang Lanxin was worried. Dudian laughed. Grandma Lan Xian, you and Master Kong have profound insights in genetics and neurology. You will certainly be able to play a different role in undead research. Moreover, you have been studying monsters for many years. Maybe you will be able to find common ground between undead and monsters and make new breakthroughs in the experiment. Zhang Lanxin was flabbergasted. Is it really possible? Let's give it a try, Dudian said. Kong Ji thought for a moment. What you said is reasonable. In that case, we will give it a try. But little Qin, why did you choose to do this research? You should know that it is basically impossible to cure undead. The probability of failure is extremely high. In case of failure, so much money. It doesn't matter. The consortium has money. We can afford it, Dudian said. But the smile on his face had disappeared. Kong Ji and Zhang Lanxin looked at each other. They were relieved as they thought of the rumors outside. If Dudian was really the illegitimate child of a director, then it wouldn't be a big deal if he lost money. At most, they would be criticized. If it was them, then they would be discredited and driven out of the company. With such a resume, other companies wouldn't dare to use them. They didn't refute. Dudian immediately signed the experimental confidentiality contract with the 4 people and officially started the project. The funds for the experiment had been transferred to Dudian's company account. He could use the company's internal shopping channel to buy materials needed for the experiment. For example, undead for research only cost 50,000 federal coins. It was half cheaper than the market price. He bought a large number of 10 undead. There were different kinds of undead: men, women, children, infected undead of the Federation, and old undead. The next day, Dudian, Zhang Lanxin, and the other 4 people held a meeting to discuss the experimental plan. After 3 days of continuous discussion, they finally formulated the experimental guidelines. Zhang Lanxin and the other 3 people took over most of the work of the experiment. Dudian didn't participate. He was alone in another research. He had the identity of the director. Although others felt strange, they didn't think much about it. Anyway, Dudian was the son of a rich family who came to play. They could take this opportunity to study undead. Even if they failed, they could accumulate valuable experimental experience. Dudian moved a set of instruments to his office in the laboratory room. Studying undead was just a cover for him. Although he was eager to find a way to cure undead, but in the past 3 months, he learned more from the company's experimental data. He knew how difficult it was. It was not something that he could pull Zhang Lanxin and the others to complete in just a few months. For him, the priority was to leave here and restore his freedom. In the future, there would be opportunities to slowly do research. Chapter 11:24. Before preparing for the experiment, Dean used X-ray to check every corner of the office. After confirming that there was no monitoring, he turned off the computer system that recorded the experiment. Then he turned off the synchronous networking function of many instruments and turned these instruments into primitive individual instruments. Without the synchronous recording function, although the instruments would be weakened in data comparison and analysis, but once connected to the network, there was a possibility of being stolen. In this way, even if the Terrace Consortium can use some authority to control the network, or if there is a master hacker behind them, they won't be able to steal my research. Dean moved all the instruments that needed to be connected to the network out of the office, leaving only the instruments that could be used without the network. Although this would increase the difficulty of his research, it was worth it. This office is my territory. They can't monitor it. I don't know how long they can endure before they come to me. Dean's mouth curved into a smile as he immediately began to study. He extracted his own blood, hair, bones, and various organs for dissecting and testing, from shallow to deep. After the body data was analyzed, he used the company's channel to buy the demon warriors cultivated by the Federation. They were at different stages, from hunters to pioneers. As for the Dominator and Abyss-level demon warriors, the price was more than 100 million. He could only wait for the second batch of funds from the consortium. When these demon warriors were sent to the laboratory, their bodies were wrapped in chains and injected with special potions. They could only exert the strength of ordinary people, and became Dean's experimental subjects. Zhang Lanxin and others were surprised to see the 3 demon warriors bought by Dean. They asked Dean, but Dean only said that his research was useful. The 4 of them didn't say anything. After all, Dean was the director and initiator of the project. He had the right to allocate the funds. They could only borrow the instruments in the laboratory to do their own research. The 3 demon warriors were tied to the iron frame of the office. They seemed to know their tragic fate, but no one resisted. Their eyes were filled with gray despair. They seemed to have lost the will to live. Dean disassembled them one by one. Brain tissue, heart, magic marks, blood and other parts. In his hands they seemed to be lifeless machines. While studying these demon warriors, he started the network function of the instrument. Anyway, the company knew that he bought the demon warriors for experiment. Even if the consortium knew the body data of the demon warriors through the network function, it was nothing to Dean. After all, these demon warriors were products of the Federation. They should have been on the experimental bench of the major consortia. After the instrument was connected to the network, Dean's research speed was greatly improved. Many data were automatically analyzed by the system. He didn't have to slowly analyze and record them one by one. This is the picture of magic marks and humans getting along. Dadian saw the physical state of the 3 through the genetic level. The hunter's DNA was mixed with a small amount of magic marks DNA. It was about 1/10 of the magic marks DNA. The color was like a colorful spiral staircase. Just 1/10 of the magic marks DNA had greatly changed the hunter's original human DNA. The most intuitive manifestation of this change was that it gave the hunter power beyond that of an ordinary person. In addition, when the adrenal glands were secreted, it would stimulate the body. The magic mark DNA in the body would cover the human DNA in a short period of time, thus replacing the body with a monster-like body. But this state could not be maintained for a long time. When the magic mark DNA was covered, the cells would divide rapidly. A person's cell division was limited. When the division reached a certain level, it would decline. Stimulating the power of the magic mark was equivalent to overdraft life. Seeing this, Dean knew why the hunters in Sylvia's world died at most in their 70s or 80s. Although they were modified by the magic mark DNA, and the cell division speed was much slower and the number of times increased. But the years of fighting were constantly consuming their life. Assuming that the lifespan of an ordinary human was about 80 years, the lifespan of a hunter was 150 years. But the years of fighting made their lifespan not much different from that of an ordinary person. They even aged faster and died earlier than ordinary people. In contrast, the DNA of the Limitless was mixed with the magic mark DNA. When the body was stimulated into the magic body, the coverage of the magic mark DNA reached 1/3. This was why when the hunter stimulated the power of the magic mark, the appearance was similar to that of a human, but the pupil changed color, the fangs grew, the nails became longer, and so on. But when the Limitless was stimulated the power of the magic mark, the body would change, such as the arms turned into the claws of a monster, becoming neither human nor beast. When it came to the pioneer, half of the DNA in the body was mixed with the magic mark DNA. During the battle, the body would change greatly. The arms turned into beast claws or extended tails, horns on the head, and so on. The manifestation was extremely obvious. It was also called the magic body. From their experiments, it could be seen that the later the magic mark DNA and the human DNA were more closely combined. Dean thought of the scenes of the strong at various stages of the magic mark fighting. Once in the abyss, once they entered the magic body, they would basically turn into a monster, and no human shadow could be seen. Although the face still had the outline of a human, the eyes and the skin on the face were not the structure of a human, or the eyes, or the gelatinous or scaly skin. The DNA of the pioneer is still a double-stranded molecular structure, but mine is a triangular structure. Each side of the triangular structure is composed of different DNA. One side is the human part of myself, one side is the origami factor, and the other side is the white factor. It's like the genetic structure of the iceworm. Dean didn't know whether the other abyss was like this, but he felt that the possibility was very small. However, what made him feel strange was that the higher the physique of a magic scar warrior, the more magic mark DNA would take up. However, the part of his human genes in his body was very strong. It was not swallowed by the origami factor, nor was it covered by the icy magic insects. In addition, his magic mark DNA, such as the splitter, the tortoiseshell, and other magic mark DNA did not appear in his DNA structure. It seemed that they did not exist in his body. He repeatedly checked, but did not find the DNA of these magic marks. He could only give up for the time being, and began to scan his heart. The god's fetus in his heart was beating along with his heart. The heart wrapped around it as if it was its warm bed. However, it was also as if this heart was the god's fetus heart. Every time it beat, the god's fetus body would stretch as if it was breathing. When it is born, it may be the time of my death. Dean's eyes slightly sank. This was a time bomb in his body, and he did not know when it would hatch. He carefully extracted part of the heart tissue, so as to avoid stimulating the heart and the divine fetus inside. It was just a little bit of tissue. For him, although it was a little painful, it was still bearable. After all, his physique was not that of an ordinary person. Chapter 11:25. This part really is the pure structure of the origami. Dean's eyes turned cold as the heart tissue was analyzed by the instrument. The pure flesh and blood of the origami had become the core organ of his body and supplied blood to his body. It involved all aspects of the body but unexpectedly didn't have any repulsive properties. It was like implanting a beast's limb into a human's body. The tissue around the limb would die, but there was no such situation around his heart. The flesh and blood of origami seemed to be integrated with his body. Through the research, Dean found that the flesh and blood of origami seemed to be a collection of origami genes in his body. The origami gene was too powerful, so it wasn't completely integrated into his body. Instead, it was gathered in the form of a heart. This meant that as long as he could find an organ that could replace the heart, then he could remove the golden heart. He could also embed the flesh and blood of origami into other parts of his body, such as fingers or wings, to increase his combat ability. The embryo in the heart seemed to be very young, and the structure of the embryo was very unstable. Dean estimated that he wouldn't be in any danger in a short period of time. He used various instruments to continue the in-depth research. In the following days, he bought a variety of materials from the company's internal shopping channel. There were different kinds of undeads and different kinds of monsters. He also bought a batch of insects. Half a month later, he also bought some plants that were contaminated by nuclear radiation. There were also some strange semi-biological plants. He didn't know the reason why these semi-biological plants grew flesh-like tissues. When they were injured, they would bleed bright red blood or dark green blood. The blood composition could be tested. Although this kind of plant was rare in the post-disaster world, but the Federation had searched for hundreds of years and had already found countless of them. There were detailed introductions in textbooks. Dean thought of the forest of despair that he encountered when he first stepped into the abyss. There were huge plants lurking in the ground waiting for the opportunity to hunt the creatures on the surface. Whether it was a human or a powerful monster that stepped into the forest, they would become food on the plate and be digested without leaving any bones. In the old era, there were plants like Venus flytrap that would passively prey on things that touched it. However, the way that Dean met the roots and vines of the forest of despair was extremely fierce. It was as if they were conscious. For Dean, living plants were not so shocking. Zhang Lanxin and others were somewhat stunned and confused by Dean's series of actions. They didn't know what he was doing. He was obviously studying the undead, but he found a lot of messy things. Was he trying to find the common ground of the undead from these monsters and plants, and find another way to solve the problem of the undead? They could only think of this explanation. Although they felt that it was whimsical, there was no way to dissuade Dean. In the highest building of the Terrace Consortium's manor, dressed in formal clothes, Blackeldian lowered his head modestly and slowly walked into this star-like room. Under his feet were the deep darkness and the vast stars. The world around him also seemed to be infinitely far away, as if he was really in the vast universe. It was not his first time to come here, and he was not as shocked as he was at the beginning, silently counting his steps in his mind. Lord God, the demon boy you asked me to take care of has applied for another batch of research fees from the consortium. Do you need approval? Black slowly stopped and asked respectfully. Yes. The voice was extremely indifferent, but there was a kind of majesty that overlooks all living beings. Black slowly respectfully said, Lord God, you asked us to monitor the demon boy, but he is doing experiments in his office every day. Moreover, he has destroyed all the monitoring equipment in the office. The instruments are not connected to the network. We can only speculate what he is doing through his consumption channels, but his behavior is a bit strange. It seems like he is playing around. I suspect that he may be deliberately consuming us or testing our patience. There was no sound after he finished. While Blackelody was feeling nervous, the extremely indifferent voice slowly said, He just thinks he's smart and thinks that he can deceive others by destroying the surveillance. He doesn't know that he's just burying his head in the sand. Mortals are so stupid. Black Slody was startled. Is he secretly planning something? He is borrowing the high-end equipment of the laboratory to study his own body. It seems that he is very confused about his own body. It also shows how backward the society of the Demon Empire is. It can't even withstand a single blow. That indifferent voice carried a trace of arrogance, seemingly very disdainful. Black slowly bowed his head and laughed. Lord God is right. How can the civilization of the Demon Empire be compared with us? They are just a group of ignorant primitive people who have been blinded by power. If we didn't find the remnants of civilization from the old era, then I reckon that they would still be living a primitive life. The demon race has been fighting frequently recently. It seems that there are some unusual movements. You must send someone to find out the reason. Yes. Go back. Lowering his head respectfully, Black turned around and slowly left the room. When the door was closed behind him, he finally let out a sigh of relief. However, his expression became a bit solemn. Calmly looking at the perforated monitor in front of him, he slowly walked out. 2 months passed. When Dean came out of the laboratory, he felt a sense of resurrection. When the sun shone on his body from the window, he felt that his stiff body seemed to have regained some vitality. In the past 2 months, the progress of Zhang Lanxin and others' experiments was extremely slow. They had failed many times, but the results were very few. It was a blow to the 4 of them. Fortunately, Dean didn't blame them. Instead, he comforted them. If it was another laboratory, they would have declared the project a failure. But Dean was still persevering. His persistence not only moved Zhang Lanxin and the others, but also surprised him. After 2 months of in-depth research, he had studied many kinds of life. Originally, he wanted to compare them with his own body, origami factor and magic mark gene. But in the process of research, it was as if he had opened a magnificent new world. He saw the richness of life and even the essence of life. Now, if he wanted to, he could even do brain replacement surgery. He could change the brain tissue into another body so that life could continue in the new body. Such a top-notch surgery could only be performed by the top medical experts in the Federation. Moreover, the failure rate was extremely high. Even many tycoons did not dare to attempt it easily. They would only take the risk when they were really on the brink of death. Chapter 11:26. In Dean's view, when life evolved to the limit, All the potential was stimulated, and it was enough to be called a god. The so-called god had endless life, omnipotent power, and could destroy the world. Even nuclear weapons couldn't kill them. Once the potential of life is played to the extreme, it would be enough to become such an existence. Dean saw the possibility through the research. For example, the ice worm had a long lifespan and could adapt to all kinds of harsh environment. It could survive no matter how powerful the toxins, the lack of oxygen or the lack of food. The only way to kill it was to freeze it at absolute zero or obliterate it with high temperature. Under absolute zero, its body could be destroyed, but once it left absolute zero, it would recover again, and the high temperature would be even more thorough, annihilating it into dust. This was also the reason why the nuclear explosion in the old era repelled the iceworm. Compared to the iceworm, origami seemed to be its natural enemy. The cells of origami had omnipotent devouring ability, and it could completely devour and digest the tough cells of the iceworm. Through research, he found that in addition to devouring the iceworm, the origami could also devour other life forms and turn them into its own food, including plants. It could be described as a super omnivore. Even rocks, soil, it could extract nutrients from them. It could eat anything. In Dean's view, if the abilities of these two races were combined, it would be invincible, it would be like a god. And his body contained these two types of genes. This was probably the crystallization of Crimson Moon's research, and it was also what she thought of as God. All along, I thought that the magic mark brought power to the body, but I didn't expect it to be so. Dean's eyes flashed. The past 2 months of research had allowed him to see more details. The relationship between the magic mark and the human body was like the relationship between the key and the treasure. The magic mark was just a key, and it stimulated the body's potential and exerted the magic mark's ability. In fact, the potential of the cells was extremely broad, and it could be described as ever-changing. Different magic marks brought different abilities, just like different keys to open the same treasure house, but each door was different, so the released power was also different. The magic mark was just a primer, the source of power still came from the body. This was just like humans. Different viruses would lead to different diseases and different changes. However, if it was a rock, there would not be such changes. The root of the problem was that humans had the ability to adapt to such changes. When he was studying before, he did not see his own magic mark genes in the gene chain. But later on, he discovered that these magic mark genes had long been swallowed by the origami factor, and the door they opened had been permanently opened. This meant that even if he stripped off his magic mark, he still had the ability to do so. Generally, hunters and even pioneers would lose their original magic marks once they stripped them of their magic marks and replaced them with new ones. This was because the hidden door in their body was not strong enough to open it by themselves. In short, it was like the door was opened halfway, and then the key was pulled out, and the door would automatically close. However, the desolate god gene had melted this key, completely embedding it within the hole of the door, causing the door to be unable to close. This discovery was of great significance to Dean. Before, he did not dare to absorb too many magic marks, not only because he was afraid that his power would be too complicated, but also because he was afraid that his body would be damaged. Just like a glutton, it was inevitable that he would eventually die of the dissection. But now that he knew the reason, he could unscrupulously absorb different magic marks, and use these magic marks to stimulate the many abilities of his body. However, when he saw the possibility of becoming a god, this surprise was not so big. In his view, this was the ability that would naturally be mastered after the life had progressed to a certain level. Perhaps after surpassing the king level, he would have such an ability. Without the help of magic marks, he could rely on the tempering and control of the genes to extend the different abilities of the genes. Every cell in the body was like his own fingers, and could be controlled and trained at will. The hand could be clenched into a fist, and it could also be used as a sword. The changes of cells were far more complicated than the 5 fingers, and they could be ever-changing. If one wanted to condense X-ray vision, they could condense it. If one wanted to grow scales, they could grow scales. At this point, he was no longer a human nor a beast. He could turn into a beast, a giant, a rock, or a piece of water. In Dean's view, this was the evolution of life that had been tempered to the extreme, that is, God. These sounded like fantasies, but it was precisely the possibility that Dean saw with the most sophisticated high-end instruments. If his research data was published online, it would be enough to shake the scientific and technological community of the Federation and shatter the worldview of countless people. However, Dean never believed that things that couldn't be explained by science and technology didn't exist. Not to mention that the things he saw brought about this conjecture, and it happened that scientific instruments helped him to see it. Technology and knowledge were only tools to help humans understand the universe. Technology couldn't explain it, but it didn't mean that it didn't exist. Existence was the truth. If technology couldn't explain it, then it could only mean that technology was too backward. The magic mark is like a phantom. The process of releasing the power of the magic mark is like the human body copying the phantom of the magic mark. At the hunter stage, one can only copy the power of the magic mark. At the abyss walker stage, one can completely copy the power of the magic mark and turn into a monster. But after all, this is just a copy. Once the original painting of the magic mark is gone, it will lose its power. But how can the real strong rely on copying? The kings of the empire didn't copy, but the magic mark took over their brain. It was like a painter who copied a famous work, but was completely obsessed with it and forgot himself. In the empire, the first warriors weren't magic mark's warriors, but the witches. They implanted the flesh and blood of the monster into their body. It was similar to copying. However, the witches gradually disappeared. They weren't replaced by the magic mark's warriors. There seems to be a gap in the middle. Perhaps there was a warrior who relied on their own evolution to show extraordinary power. Dean's eyes flashed. The top secret information and chronicles of the giant wall flashed in his mind. This possibility was not impossible, but if there was, it meant that the water of the empire was deeper than he imagined. If there was a warrior who relied on their own evolution to surpass the strength of ordinary people, then why did they disappear? Unfortunately, after all, he didn't come into contact with the core secrets of the empire. What he saw today was based on the detection of the instruments in the Federation. Chapter 11:27. Dean wanted to explore the hidden secrets of the empire, but he also knew that he couldn't protect himself with his current strength, let alone go to the empire. But the harvest brought by the research was huge. He saw the shadow of God. If he saw it, there was a possibility to do it. Using magic marks to stimulate the body is just a drop in the bucket. It can't stimulate all the potential. I need to find a more suitable and efficient way through research, Dean thought. Although he saw the way, but it was very difficult to take this step. Throughout the ages, he was by no means the first to see this possibility. For example, Burrow, Crimson Moon, and their research showed that they also saw such a realm of life. It was like a human seeing the sun, but to climb the sun, it was more than 10,000 times more difficult. After a short rest, Dean continued to dive into the new experiment. This time he didn't study himself, so he connected all the instruments in the office to greatly improve the efficiency of the research. If the consortium discovers my research through the instrument network, they won't understand what I'm researching. Instead, they will think that they know my secrets, but they won't know that I've disconnected from the network to study my body. Dean thought. After a few days of research, he no longer closed the office and devoted himself to his own experiment. At this time, the experimental data that he had read before played a role. There were some experts who tried to stimulate the potential of life, such as electric stimulation, nerve pain stimulation, and so on. For Dean, nerve pain stimulation obviously didn't have a big effect. Since he woke up, he had fought countless battles and suffered countless injuries. It could be seen that the effect of this method was too poor. He could only choose to use electric stimulation. He used the company's internal channels to buy new materials. There were undead, monsters, special bloodthirsty plants, and young men and women of different ages. These ordinary people without skills were sold at a low price. The relatively high price of ordinary people were trained as maids or had special talent. Zhang Lanxin and others weren't surprised to see undeads and monsters being transported over. But they were surprised to see 4 young men and women of different ages. Chu Huiru quickly asked Dudian, "Qin Mo, has your experiment reached the live experiment stage?" Dean vaguely said, "Almost, I have some confidence." The 4 of them were shocked. They didn't expect that Dean would be able to figure out the results in just 2 months. Thinking of this, the 4 of them were excited and looking forward to it. Although they felt that the possibility of Dean's success was very low, they couldn't help but have a glimmer of hope. When the 4 young men and women who were transported over saw their surroundings and the conversation between Zhang Lanxin and the other 3, their faces turned pale with fright, and their eyes were filled with despair. However, even the kind and benevolent Zhang Lanxin did not plead for them when she saw them. She only showed some pity. This was not because Zhang Lanxin had seen through people's hearts because of the debt collection, but because she had seen this kind of thing many times before. Moreover, she had personally conducted experiments on living people. To her, this was work, and it did not involve any other emotions. Moreover, the company had already told them about the origins of these people. They were all volunteers that the company had spent money to recruit from society. The experiment continued. 1 week later, suddenly 2 people came to Dean's laboratory. Zhang Lanxin and others who were busy with their experiments were shocked when they saw the 2 people. They quickly stopped their experiments, took off their silicone gloves, and hurried to greet the 2 people politely. "Boss! Mr. 1D. Hello, Mr. 1D. Zhang Lanxin and others called out in succession. The one they called Mr. 1D was standing on the left. He was slender, wearing a black suit, wearing an expensive mechanical watch made by a master. He had golden hair. Although he looked more than 40 years old, but he was very handsome. He was a very handsome uncle. Next to him was a burly man with short hair. His eyes were like lightning. He was Chinese, wearing a sleeveless blue shirt. His muscles were bulging, and he looked like a bodyguard. Zhang Lanxin and others directly ignored this person, but the next moment they found that the CEO of the Randy Company, who was also the biggest boss of the company, just smiled, and then with a bit of politeness and modesty said to the burly man next to him, "The person is inside, please wait a moment." Then he told Zhang Lanxin, "Call Qin Mo out." Zhang Lanxin and others were very keen in observing people's expressions. They were shocked and deeply looked at the burly man who looked like a bodyguard. 2 words emerged in their mind: consortium. Only people from the Terrace Consortium could make Wendy so polite. Otherwise, as the boss of the Randy Company, even in the face of the directors of the Locke Consortium and the Milan Consortium, he didn't need to be so humble. "Looking for me?" Dean came out of the laboratory. When the 2 came to the building, he had noticed them. He also used his ultrasonic hearing to hear their casual conversation. It seemed that the people from the headquarters of the Terrace Consortium had come to look for him. It seemed that they wanted to take him away. Zhang Lanxin saw Dean come out, so she didn't go forward. She asked Wendy, "Boss, why are you looking for little Qin? It's none of your business here. You go out first." Wendy slightly shook his head. His attitude was somewhat cold. Zhang Lanxin, Chu Huiru, and the others looked at each other. They seemed to feel that the visitor didn't come with good intentions. In the past, right, Wendy would always greet them with a smile and be very polite to them, who had level 1 authority, and were the pillars of the company. He would never be so rude. However, after all, the other party was the boss. They had no temper and could only leave. Before leaving, Zhang Lanxin said with a worried look, "Boss, if Little Qin's experimental project made the company feel embarrassed or he spent too much money, I hope you can be magnanimous. I can bear part of the cost for Little Qin. The failure of the experiment isn't his fault alone." Wendy shook his head and smiled. "All right, go out. You don't need to worry about it." Zhang Lanxin wanted to say something but stopped. Kong Ji, who was next to her, winked and dragged her away. The door of the laboratory was closed. Later, Wendy wanted to talk to Dean, but he saw Dean sitting on the chair next to him. He looked at his legs as if he was the owner of the room and looked at the two guests. Wendy slightly raised his eyebrows. He was unhappy in his heart. However, he knew the identity of the latter. His face was slightly cold as he indifferently said, "Mr. Qin Mo, the consortium is looking for you. They need you to go over, please." Dean looked at the man next to him with interest. "Rank 10, oh no, it should be rank 11. I didn't expect that the consortium of the Federation could cultivate such a strong person. If I remember correctly, rank 9 is the ruler, rank 10 is the abyss. Rank 11 is the level of the middle abyss in the Empire. I don't know what kind of power you can display if you drive the monster mecha of Lock Consortium." Wendy was stunned. He turned to look at the man next to him. Chapter 11:28. The consortium finally couldn't bear it anymore? Dean looked at him with interest. Wright was taken aback. He couldn't help but ask, "You already knew that we knew your identity? Are you talking about a tongue twister?" Dean glanced at the boss of the company. "I want to know the reason why you suddenly invited me to the consortium. Is it because the observation period is over? Or are you going to torture me for something?" Wright was about to open his mouth, but the brawny man next to him coldly said, "You will know the specific reason when you arrive at the consortium." Dean slightly raised his eyebrows and smiled. "So you are ready to forcibly kidnap me? This is the center of Odin area. How much do you think the losses will be caused if a fight breaks out here?" Wright's eyelids twitched as he looked at the brawny man next to him. The brawny man didn't wait for him to speak as he sneered. "If you resist, then we will kill you. If you don't want to die, then come with us obediently." "Are you threatening me?" Dean looked at him with a faint smile. The brawny man coldly said, "You can understand it that way." Dean smiled as he gently tapped the table. "There are 8 rank 10 masters in the surrounding buildings, 8 laser guns, 3 creators mecha on standby in the emergency tunnel 3 streets away, 5,000 troops and 12 combat helicopters. Do you dare to threaten me?" Not only did Letwendy's expression change drastically upon hearing this, even the burly man's pupils constricted and his expression changed. The smile on Dean's face disappeared little by little. He slowly stood up and indifferently looked at the brawny man. "Come over and kneel down." "What?" The burly man felt as if he had heard something unbelievable. His eyes widened, and then he laughed out loud in anger. "So what if you sensed it? Previously, I was afraid of your battle strength. Now that your perceptive ability is so strong, it indicates that you are a demon fighter with perceptive ability but weak fighting ability. Now that you know that we've been fully prepared, you should be obedient." "Noisy!" Dudian coldly snorted. His body moved as fast as an afterimage. The brawny man's expression changed drastically, and he hurriedly pushed Letwendy away. His entire body's skin transformed, and he entered the demon body. However, halfway through the transformation, only a thin layer of cuticle-like scales grew on his skin. Before he could completely transform, a cold face appeared right in front of him. The burly man turned pale with fright and reflexively raised his hand to block. Gotcha! There was a sudden sharp pain in his knee, and the brawny man felt his body sinking. Dean, who was a head shorter than him, had to look up to see him. The brawny man was already kneeling on the ground, but his kneeling posture was very strange. His knees were bent back at 90 degrees, and his shoulders were firmly held by Dean's palm, making his body unable to move or stand up. "You!" The brawny man grimaced in pain. He felt humiliated, but at the same time, he felt a chill. Especially when he saw Dean's indifferent eyes, he felt as if he was being stared at by a beast or tiger. He couldn't believe it. Wasn't the demon race from the abyss? Why were they so strong? He hadn't used the demon's body, but his speed was so fast that it was hard to keep up with him. "It seems that the abyss cultivated by the Federation is a fake," Dean said lightly. Letwendy climbed up from the ground and saw Dudian's knees. His face was full of shock, and his body slightly trembled. The shadow of the demon race was engraved in the memory of his generation. At the moment he saw Dudian's ferocious means, it was like confirming the rumors. He wanted to escape immediately. You can't run away." The burly man gritted his teeth and endured the pain in his knees. Cold sweat had already seeped out of his forehead, and he said with a trembling voice, "As long as you leave this place, they will immediately kill you, and the Chuangshi god Mecha will also immediately move out to exterminate you. No matter how strong you are, you won't be able to withstand the encirclement of 3 Chuangshi god Mecha. Our army will evacuate the surrounding people as soon as possible, and won't give you the chance to take hostages. Even if you take hostages, it won't affect our judgment. We can completely suppress the deaths of a few people." He said these words in one breath, very smoothly, but after he finished speaking, he couldn't help but feel nervous. After all, his life and death were in the hands of others, and it was all in the hands of others. This kind of feeling could not help but be afraid. "Consortium asked you to take me there. What are you going to do?" Dean asked. The brawny man was startled. "I don't know. I was ordered to take you back to Consortium." "You don't know?" Dean narrowed his eyes. "The Consortium has long known my identity and indulged me to live here. There are always Creator's armors on standby and there is a lot of monitoring. Although I seem to be free, but I have been raised in this company. Do you think this is a good thing or a bad thing?" The burly man's face changed and he said with a trembling voice, "I really don't know. Perhaps only the board members know. No matter what, you can't escape. You might as well surrender." Dean patted his face. "It seems that the Consortium has long known that I'm a demon and that I'm an abyss-level demon. But they allowed an abyss demon to live in this bustling city. They aren't afraid that I'll go crazy and kill everyone. It's hard to believe that the Consortium's leader is not only confident but also cold-blooded. He has enough confidence to kill me in this bustling city and doesn't mind the death of some people. It's hard to believe that such a person has good intentions towards me." The brawny man's face turned ugly. "What do you want?" "I want freedom." Dean laughed. The brawny man was stunned. "Gotcha." Dean twisted the neck of the brawny man. At the same time, he lowered his head and shot out like lightning. Puff! The moment he lowered his head, 4 lasers shot at him, piercing through the windows outside the building and burning a few black marks on the ground. Wendy, who was next to him, was so frightened that his entire body trembled. When Dean swooped out, he quickly broke through the building. His whole body was demonized, and a pair of wings appeared on his back. He flashed flexibly in the air and rushed to a nearby high-rise building. He saw that there was a restaurant in the high-rise building. The scenery was beautiful and there were many celebrities sitting there. There was melodious music playing. At the moment, the glass outside the building was broken, and all the tranquility was broken. Dean rushed in and saw a young man wearing a black hat sitting by the window. The young man was holding a metal laser cannon in his hand. Die! Dean swooped down. His splitting blade cut the floor and walls of the restaurant. 2 waiters were standing in the aisle with red wine and plates. Their bodies were cut into 2 pieces by Dean's wings. Chapter 11:29. Dean quickly chased after him. Just as he was about to dive down, he suddenly felt a sense of danger. He braked in time. Less than half a meter in front of him, several laser beams were shot down. It was the other people who were blocking him. Bye-bye. The youth who climbed out of the building saw that Dean was frightened by the laser beams, and his heart was relieved. He grinned and no longer stayed. His body was like a gecko sticking to the glass outside the building, and he quickly climbed into the distance. As long as he kept a distance from Dean, the other people's long-range laser beams would be enough to kill Dean. Puff! Suddenly, a blazing feeling came from his forehead. The youth's smile froze on his face before the thought disappeared from his mind. His eyes were wide open, full of disbelief, indescribable panic and despair. When the world went dark, the body of the youth fell from the building and hit the roadside flower bed, making a loud noise. All the passers-by around were stunned. Dean's eyes were indifferent. He retracted his gaze and turned to the restaurant. Under the panicked and frightened eyes, he broke the window and flew out. Like a giant eagle, he flew over the building and rushed to the rooftop of another building. There were two figures, a man and a woman, holding laser cannons. They were wearing sunglasses and dressed very coldly, like killers. Seeing Dean rushing over, there was a trace of panic on their faces. They immediately locked their laser cannons on Dean's body and shot. But Dean's body was erratic in the air. Before they could aim, he had moved away from the scope. After shooting several times, the two finally knew that it was impossible to lock Dean's body with laser cannons. After all, it was not a missile, so it could be installed with automatic tracking function. Run! The two panicked and fired a few shots to slow down Dean's speed. Then they ran to the other side of the building. They stimulated the demon body. The woman was like a spider, crawling on the ground. Her abdomen became extremely bloated, and a large number of small spiders were ejected from her lower body. These small spiders scattered along the rooftop and quickly pulled a net to intercept Dean. Die! Dean didn't plan to land in the air. His eyes flashed coldly. Two beams of light suddenly shot out from the bright red gem on his forehead, entering the back of the spider-woman and the neck of the crocodile next to her. Their bodies stopped abruptly and fell forward to the ground. The laser cannons in their arms were thrown out of the rooftop and fell into the street below. Dean didn't stop. His body crossed an arc and rushed towards another building. How is it possible? When the 5 people hiding in the other 3 buildings saw this scene, their faces were filled with shock and disbelief. Under the encirclement of the 8 of them, the target had actually killed 3 of their teammates at lightning speed. It should be known that they were not ordinary people, but super powerhouses who had obtained the power of the demon race. Putting aside external power like Mecha, they were more than enough to look down on the people of the Federation. Since they had obtained the demon's power, they hadn't felt the threat of death for a long time. But at this moment they felt a kind of creepy feeling. They felt a strong killing intent and shadow from the ferocious figure. In contrast, they seemed to have degenerated into ordinary people who could only rely on guns. Even if they had guns, they couldn't aim at the target and kill him. This is not an ordinary abyss demon. In one of the commercial buildings, 2 snipers looked at Dean, who was rushing to another building. Their faces were full of horror. They tried to aim and snipe, but Dean's figure was like a ghost. He flickered in the scope, and they couldn't lock him. They could only shoot randomly, but all of them were avoided. It seemed that the enemy clearly knew the time and direction of their shots. Hey, hey! Headquarters, headquarters! Requesting reinforcements. The enemy is not an ordinary abyss demon. What's the matter? A majestic voice came from the headset. Both of them anxiously reported. The enemy easily killed Myron. He can avoid our laser cannons. He has power beyond the ordinary abyss demon. He has the ability to fly and long-range shooting. He seems to be able to launch laser attack. Moreover, he has a super strong perception ability. After saying so much in one breath, the 2 of them felt a trace of horror in their hearts. they suddenly discovered that the coverage of the target's magic marks was too wide. Generally speaking, magic marks that were good at perception were naturally weak in the aspect of combat. However, what the target had shown so far seemed to be a comprehensive ability. Every aspect was incomparably powerful. What kind of rare magic marks were these? In contrast, their magic marks were more than a level lower. How is it possible? Chairman, why are you here? What? A series of exclamations came from the earpiece, causing the two of them to be stunned. Soon, the boss took a deep breath and adjusted his breathing. Everyone retreat to the front line and cooperate with the creator's mecha to kill the target. The words were passed to everyone's headset through their communication channel. Even the 3 dead people could hear the boss's voice. Unfortunately, they couldn't hear it anymore. However, the remaining 5 people, or rather, 4 people, felt relieved after receiving the order and immediately retreated. Retreat? Dean threw away a demonic serpent that had its neck twisted. He glanced at the other 2 buildings where 4 people were in groups of 2. He saw that they were retreating in a hurry. He released his perception to a larger range. He saw that the 3 creators' mechs in the underground emergency tunnel had started to surround them. In addition, all the troops in the tunnel had been dispatched to evacuate the people in the surrounding buildings. Ready to get on the mecha? Dean narrowed his eyes. It was the first time that he had seen a creator's mecha. It was known as the top mecha. It was listed as a 5-star rated by the Federation military. It was said that it could shake the king of the empire and strangle all the abyss demons. At the moment, it rushed out of the emergency tunnel and showed extraordinary speed. It quickly surrounded the building where he was located but didn't immediately attack. The 3 mechas were waiting for the army to evacuate the surrounding people. The longer they delayed, the better it would be for them. Dean didn't rush to attack. He held the laser cannon in his hand and stood on the edge of the rooftop. Under his feet was the abyss of the street. The pedestrians were as small as ants. He quietly looked at the 3 creators' mechas. His brows slightly wrinkled. He wasn't thinking about how to break out of the encirclement of the 3 mechas, but the motive and purpose of the consortium. They had allowed him to stay in the Randy Company for a long time, but now they wanted to kill him because he disobeyed the order. While he was thinking, the surrounding troops had already dismissed many people. Dean also saw Zhang Lanxin and others in the Randy Company's building being escorted by the army to the emergency tunnel. Chapter 1130. You're courting death. Dean's eyes narrowed. He lifted the laser cannon in his hand and fired. The laser beam flew out and pierced through one of the helicopters. The helicopter's propeller blades were broken. It tilted and rolled over. There was a burst of screams as it fell towards a nearby building. When it was about to hit the building, a creator's mecha ejected a large net from its wrist and caught the helicopter. Dean didn't pay attention to him as he turned to shoot at the other helicopters. The helicopters didn't expect that Dean would aim at them, so they panicked and launched laser cannons and missiles to attack. When the missiles were launched, the machete-like wings on Dean's back suddenly shook out a black light, like a black feather, and hit the missile. Bang! The missile was intercepted in mid-air. Whoosh! Dean's body flashed and he dodged away the moment the laser cannon was launched. This laser cannon was not comparable to the laser cannons of the old era. In the old era, the laser guns and cannons couldn't kill the enemy. Especially the laser gun. It could only destroy the enemy's pupils, blind them and lose their combat effectiveness. Although the name was very powerful, the effect on the battlefield was average. But today's laser cannons and laser guns were like the movies of the old era. The laser was like a substance that could penetrate steel plates with high temperature. Moreover, it ignored the weather and could fight all day long. The laser cannons were also countless times stronger. The diameter of the muzzle was about 60 centimeters. It was enough to destroy half of a human's body into ashes. However, although the laser cannon was fast like a flash of lightning, The person who operated it had an ordinary physique. In Dean's eyes, the trigger of the laser cannon was like slow motion. There was enough time for him to predict and dodge. After avoiding the bombardment of several laser cannons, Dean also launched the laser cannon in his hand. Although both were laser weapons, the power of the laser cannon in his hand was obviously stronger. The laser cannon penetrated the head of the helicopter, and the cockpit exploded. The helicopter that lost control also fell, but was rescued by the creator's mecha below, so it didn't directly crash. Dean was carrying a huge laser cannon as he walked through the rain of bullets. Every time he lifted the cannon, an armed helicopter would fall to the ground. After a moment, there were no more helicopters in the sky. Dean stood at the top of the tall building. He could see more than half of the city under his feet. He saw a small aircraft flashing in the distance. It was a camera. It should be a reporter from some nearby news agency or some people with related hobbies. Dean naturally didn't worry about the problem of exposure. Anyway, his identity had been leaked. There was no place for him in the Federation. Even if he hid or fled, he could change his face. At his level of strength, the face was not important. He could change it at any time. What he cared about was the inside. Even for Dean, the inside was not important. He only cared about his heart. If he wanted to further gain strength, this heart full of divinity was also something that must be deprived. It's time to get serious, Dean muttered to himself. At this time, the creator's mecha that caught the fallen helicopter had already settled the several armed helicopters. The people in the helicopters were dispersed. The people who were escorted to the emergency tunnel by the army were also far away from the nearby underground emergency tunnel to avoid being affected by the battle. Only a few panicked and frightened figures were left within a radius of thousands of meters. Dean's eyes fell on the three creators' mecha. The creator's mecha looked like a human. It was extremely huge. It was about 12 meters tall. The whole body was golden. There were wings on the back. Obviously, they had the ability to fly. At first glance, it looked like a golden god. It was tall and majestic. Based on the appearance alone, it was the best among the many mechas. Dean's eyes penetrated the layers and saw the pilots inside the mecha. They were 3 rank 10 warriors. The military put an end to the demons. Even if the demons were cultivated by the Federation, they were either assembled by the Terrace Consortium or sent into the army by the Consortium. He took a deep breath. He didn't wait for the 3 creators' mechas to make a move. He took the lead and ejected a beam of light from the blood-red crystal on his forehead towards the creator's mecha that had saved the armed helicopters. They were waiting for the army to clean up the battlefield, but Dean couldn't drag this on any longer. The 3 demons in the mecha might not care about the lives of ordinary people, but they would definitely care about the other forces taking the opportunity to attack the Terrace Consortium. It was inevitable that they would have some concerns. The beam of light was so fast that the creator's mecha didn't have time to react. But when the beam hit 3 meters in front of its head, it suddenly stirred up a ripple. It was an automatic defensive energy shield that blocked the beam of light. Dean's eyes darkened. He raised the laser cannon in his hand and quickly fired. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. 7 or 8 laser beams were fired in a row. Without exception, all of them hit the target. Although the god of creation reacted to Dean's finger and muzzle, Dean's aiming speed was too fast. He was 1 step ahead of the god of creation in predicting all the dodging positions. The energy shield outside the creator's mecha rippled like water. When Dean fired the last shot, the energy shield was broken and the beam hit the mecha's shoulder, leaving a faint burn mark on the golden shoulder armor. Dean narrowed his eyes. The toughness of the creator's mecha was beyond his expectations. The power of the laser cannon was enough to obliterate all abyssal-level lifeforms. Only some monsters that had evolved special armor or scales could block it. If it was an abyssal-level human, no one would be able to block it without using their demonic body. But at this moment, Not even the paint on the surface of the creator's mecha was wiped off. Of course, maybe the golden color wasn't the paint. Whoosh! Dean threw away the laser cannon that had exhausted its energy plate and swooped down from the tall building. His wings spread out and shot towards the creator's mecha like a sharp sword. The short-haired young demon in the creator's mecha sneered. His hands were inserted into two white balls, and he was wearing a ring on his head. At this moment, he waved his hands. The arms of the creator's mecha also waved, but the speed was extremely fast. Coupled with the prediction of the mecha's intelligence system, the punch intercepted the best attack trajectory of Dean's dive. Dean's body suddenly stopped and twisted quickly. The strong momentum made his wings feel like they were being torn, but he temporarily changed his trajectory and turned at a faster speed to the top of the Genesis god's head. For him, this distance was covered in the blink of an eye. Chapter 11:31. Dean didn't meet the blade head-on. He twisted his body again and slid to the shoulder of the creation god mecha. At the moment when he was about to touch the mecha, he felt an unusual sense of danger. His wings suddenly expanded, and the wind filled the inside of his wings in an instant. He stopped his body abruptly. He saw a white light flashing through the gap between him and the creation god mecha's shoulder. Dean saw a creation god mecha next to him shoot a laser from its finger. Holy light strike! A trace of anger flashed across the face of the short-haired young man in the Genesis god mech. He looked coldly at the Genesis god mech that had helped him. Although he was angry, he did not miss this opportunity. The target had already entered the 50-meter radius of the mech's holy light. He immediately used the most violent method to counterattack. Dean was always paying attention to the operators of the three creation god mecha through his X-ray vision. When he saw the short-haired youth quickly press the button, he immediately guessed what he was going to do. His eyes narrowed slightly. He didn't retreat but continued to pounce on the ladder. At the same time, he used the Sun Beast gem on his forehead to shoot out beams of light. These beams were not aimlessly scattered, but covered the whole body of the creation god mecha. When the short-haired youth launched the holy light strike, the fingers, shoulders, chest and other armors of the creation god mecha suddenly deformed. From the inside, a dark muzzle-like caliber was exposed. There was a faint light preheating and firing. The whole preheating process was less than 0.1 seconds. However, Dean seemed to have predicted it in advance. When these parts of the armor were removed to expose the firing caliber, the beam of light from his forehead shot into these caliber. In an instant, a violent explosion sounded from the whole body of the creation god mecha. The short-haired youth sitting in the cockpit of the mecha was completely stunned. The violent vibration of the mecha and the shaking screen in front of him made him feel dizzy. He couldn't help but open his eyes wide in disbelief. Break! Dean seized the gap of the explosion and approached in an instant. This time, even the two Genesis god mecha next to him didn't expect such a situation to occur and couldn't act in time. The splitting blades on his body stood up like a tail, turned into sharp blades, and suddenly stabbed out. In an instant, he stabbed thousands of times. The special golden alloy on the surface of the Genesis god mecha was broken, and cracks and holes of different sizes were cut out. Dean roared as he swung his tail blade. It was like a black whirlwind chopper as it slammed into the neck of the creator's mech kacha. The head of the creator's mech was cut off along with the jumping electric light. Dean quickly tore the fibrous tube in his neck, then shrank his wings and drilled into it. You! The pupils of the short-haired youth shrank to the size of a pinhole as he looked at Dean, who broke into the cockpit from above. His face was full of horror as if he had seen a ghost. Before he could use the devil's body, a sharp blade suddenly shot out from Dean's chest and pierced his head. After doing this, Dean shrank all the blades on his body so as not to cut the surrounding equipment. He pulled up the body of the short-haired youth and threw it along the neck of the mecha. Then he sat down in his seat and glanced at the control board in front of him. Compared to the black lizard mecha he used in the military, this Genesis God mecha was of a higher grade. However, its operating interface was more concise. Unlike the black lizard mecha, there were hundreds of basic keys plus complex keys. This mecha only had a total of 8 keys. It mainly relied on nerves to connect the mecha. Although it was operated by humans, the intelligent system of the mecha would also assist the human brain. It was a combination of human and machine synchronization. It was also the highest crystallization of federal technology. It's worthy to be evaluated as a king's mecha. All the performance is top-notch. Fortunately, I have learned about the operation of the Genesis God mecha before. I have also seen some promotional videos of the Genesis God mecha. Otherwise, the Holy Strike alone would be enough to blow most of my body into ashes. Dean was paying attention to the other two creators' armors while checking the damage of the one he was in. Energy shield charging, need 28 minutes 47 seconds. Weapon system damage 23.7%. 73 laser tubes broken. Do you want to replace? Dean frowned slightly when he heard the words from the intelligent voice. At this moment, he didn't put on the helmet and used nerves to connect to the mecha. The Genesis God mecha had been bound to the short-haired youth. Only the manufacturer had the ability to unlock it. He could only use primitive means to operate it. When he heard the inspection report, he once again felt the horror of the Genesis God mecha. Previously, it had withstood 7 or 8 laser beams to barely penetrate the energy shield. Unexpectedly, it only needed half an hour to repair. As for the damage caused by the Holy Strike, it covered the entire body of the mecha. However, the damage was less than 1/5. This meant that although the Holy Strike was powerful, it wasn't the only attack method of the Genesis God mecha. Moreover, it could be replaced. This endurance is even more terrifying than the king's. I don't know what energy is used to drive the mecha. Even nuclear kinetic energy may not be able to bring such endurance. This thought flashed in Dean's mind. He immediately chose to replace the laser tube. He saw that the joints of the mecha were pulled open. Broken metal fragments were ejected from inside. Soon, the intelligent systems prompt sounded. The laser tube had been replaced. Once again, the Holy Strike could be used. Dean didn't continue to operate. Instead, he looked at the two Genesis God mechas in the distance. Through the outside of the mecha, he could see the expressions of the two people inside. There was a bit of coldness and dignity in them. If I didn't understand this Genesis God mecha and could see the operation inside through the X-ray, I might not be a match for this thing with my strength. Dean looked at the two people who were constantly approaching. His eyes flashed. The reason why he didn't escape at the first moment but braced himself to fight against the 3 Genesis God mechas was because he knew that if he escaped from the city, he would die faster. At that time, with the force of the Terrace Consortium, they could unscrupulously send more Genesis God mechas to encircle him. They wouldn't have to worry about civilian casualties and excessive damage. But now that he had snatched a Genesis God mecha, he could exert several times his strength. There was no need to continue to fight with these people. Holy Strike, divert. Dean's fingers quickly skimmed over the virtual keyboard. The upper and lower body of the mecha suddenly twisted in different directions. A burst of light beams shot out and shrouded the two creators' mechas, one from the front and one from the back. Chapter 1132. After Dean left with the creator's mecha, several officers in a hidden underground tunnel received the news. They raised their hands and clenched their fists to signal the troops to stop. Why don't we go? Let's go. What's going on? Under the protection of the army, many scientists and executives of the Randy Company panicked when they saw the army suddenly stop, and they couldn't help but urge anxiously. Lanxin, is that Chinemo? Kong Ji, Zhang Lanxin, Chu Huiru, and the other scientists with Level 1 authority stood together. At this moment, when everyone was anxious, Kong Ji was very calm. This old man had a worried look on his face as he asked Zhang Lanxin in a low voice. Zhang Lanxin had a complex expression as she was speechless. Although they had retreated in a hurry, but they had seen the scene of Dudian shooting the helicopter. They had heard the words of the officers, so they knew that it was a demon invasion. But the demon turned out to be Qin Mo. Zhang Lanxin repeatedly recalled the past few months of getting along with him. The enthusiasm, seriousness, concentration and kindness of the young man made her feel that he was impeccable. She really couldn't combine this delicate and pretty face with the fiendish devil clan, but the truth forced her to believe it was true. She couldn't help but think, could it be that there were good and bad devil clan? Everyone be quiet. Amidst the noise and anxiety in the surroundings, a tall and sturdy officer with strong arms roared. After everyone quietened down, he said loudly, "The demon clan has already left this place and went somewhere else. This is the safest place for the time being. Everyone, don't panic. If we continue to retreat, it's hard to guarantee that we won't encounter the demon clan again. Everyone, stay here first and wait for the detailed situation on the surface to come before making a plan." Everyone was relieved as they heard that the demon had left. Some of them patted their chest as if they were relieved. "He has left?" Kong Ji looked at the sky and seemed to be relieved. Zhang Lanxin noticed his expression, and her heart moved slightly. Then, she seemed to have thought of something. Her old face revealed a trace of gentleness, and she said in an extremely low voice, "Perhaps he is a good demon. I hope he can leave. If he is caught, I hope the higher-ups can give him a chance to change." Chu Huiru's eyes widened as she heard their words. She felt that the two old scientists were crazy. They were worried about a demon. What a pity. I probably won't be able to see him again. Kong Ji's lips curled into a bitter smile. When he noticed that someone was looking at him, his expression immediately became indifferent. Whoosh! The wind was whistling in his ears. In Dean's line of sight, the building under his feet was rapidly moving backward. The two creators' mechs were desperately chasing after him. However, the performance of the mech was the same. Dean rushed out of the encirclement and opened the distance. Although he started the mech's fastest speed, he could only maintain this distance. He couldn't get closer unless the energy of the creator's mech was exhausted. From the intensity of the previous battle, his energy consumption was clearly higher than that of the other two mecha. However, the remaining energy inside was enough to support him charging out of Duyo City and a large distance away from the Federation. Once we get out of the city, we'll go to the demonic creature zone outside the peace circle. Hopefully, we'll find a chance to escape. Dean's eyes were dignified. His mind was quickly thinking of a way to escape, but he suddenly felt that something was wrong. It seemed that he had ignored something. At this time, a towering city wall appeared at the end of his line of sight. He had reached the end of Duyo City. "I've been running for 3 minutes. During this time, they shouldn't have enough time to mobilize other creators' mechs to surround me." Dean looked at the city wall that was getting closer and closer. His brows gradually wrinkled. He hesitated for a moment, but he still gritted his teeth and pushed the creator's mech. He directly rushed over. There was no absolute strategy. At the critical moment, he still had to take risk. Soon, Dean was close to the city wall. He saw a large number of cannons being mobilized and fired at him. Dean was relieved to see that the city defense weapons had locked onto him. He quickly looked around. He didn't see any other creators' mechs. His heart settled down. He cooperated with the creator's mech's AI system and flexibly flashed among the cannons and lasers. The strength of these attacks was detected by the AI system. Some of the strength could be ignored. He only chose the attacks that were enough to affect his speed and bring damage to the mech. It had to be said that the AI system of the mech was extremely powerful. Even in such a disadvantageous situation, it still picked the best plan. Moreover, it was calculated in minutes and seconds. It was many times faster than human judgment. The creator's mech rushed out of the flames like a golden lightning. The golden mech was like a god. It was unscathed. Its terrifying defense shocked the many soldiers on the city wall. Before they could continue the second wave of firepower, 2 golden beams rushed over. An officer immediately ordered them to let go. Whoosh, whoosh. After the 2 golden beams rushed over, a tsunami-like roar swept from behind. It was as if the whole world was roaring. This was the sound of the wind driven by the mech. Energy, 37%. Dean glanced at the energy display on the mech. It only had 3.5 bars. Things that he had learned during this period of time appeared in his mind. The range and distance of the peace circle, as well as the area it contained, appeared in his mind. He quickly calculated in his mind. Combined with the previous journey and energy consumption, the result was that he could barely rush out of the peace circle. Whoosh! A laser flew over from behind and hit the wings on the back of the mech. It made the mech lose balance and almost slide to the ground. However, the balance system and AI system of the mech quickly adjusted and stabilized the tilt. However, the speed was greatly reduced. Demon Clan, surrender yourselves. A cold woman's voice suddenly came from the communication device in the mech. Dean glanced at the 2 mechs behind him. He saw that it was the woman in one of the mechs who was talking. He frowned slightly. Suddenly, he felt that the bad premonition that he had ignored before emerged again. Stubborn. Prepare to die. The woman saw that Dean ignored her, and a trace of annoyance flashed in her eyes. Dean's face suddenly changed. It was not because of the woman's words, but because he finally realized what he had ignored. Not good. Dean was just about to stand up and rush out of the mech. Suddenly, a tough alloy belt extended from the back of the cockpit chair and firmly tied his body to the cockpit chair. At the same time, the virtual keyboard in front of him automatically shrank and disappeared. The only window became blood red, and the number 3 jumped out. Start self-destruct program. The AI of the mech said in a dull voice. Chapter 1133. Break for me! Dean's hair stood up and he roared. His body crazily grew cutting blades, like messy magic tentacles, and instantly pierced the driver's seat. However, after using too much strength, his heart suddenly pounded madly and violently vibrated. This vibration spread throughout his entire body, as if all the muscles in his body were trembling and contracting along with his heartbeat. Even his consciousness was buzzing and he felt dizzy. Dean's eyes flashed a trace of trance, but in the blink of an eye, he sobered up and waved the sharp blades to cut the alloy belt that bound his body. Bang! The alloy belt was cut by the sharp blades, and it made a harsh sound. What shocked Dean was that the toughness of the alloy belt was beyond his imagination. He had been using the cutting blades for so many years, but he couldn't cut the alloy belt that was less than a centimeter thick. How is it possible? Dean was stunned for a moment. He saw the number on the screen had changed to 2. When he noticed it, the number changed again and changed to 1. His pupils shrank slightly. At this moment, he felt that the blood in his body seemed to flow against the current and burst into his mind. An unprecedented sense of danger made him feel that the time seemed to stop. No, 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 his consciousness shouted. The next moment, the cutting blades all over his body shrank at an unprecedented speed and returned to his body. The whole process took less than half a second. The moment the cutting blades retracted into his body, a strong light emitted from his body. It was dazzling, and the temperature in the cockpit soared. Whoosh! Dean's body melted like magma and flowed out of the alloy belt. Among them, a mass of red mucus rushed out the fastest, and suddenly turned into a sharp blade, rushing along the neck of the mech. The whole process happened in 1 second, as fast as a phantom. When the bright red mucus rushed out of the mech, the scene outside the mech also appeared in Dean's line of sight. He was just about to breathe a sigh of relief, but he was suddenly stunned. Bang! The creator's mech suddenly exploded in mid-air. It was as if a nuclear missile had exploded in mid-air, and the loud sound could be heard for hundreds of miles, even reaching the sky above the nearest city. The debris, smoke, and ash from the explosion spread like a mushroom cloud. The small night rats on the ground nearby were so frightened that they immediately crawled back into their nests, shivering. Before the smoke dissipated, 2 golden flashes of light shot into the mushroom cloud. Half a minute later, the 2 mechs rushed out of the mushroom cloud and stopped in midair nearby. One of the Genesis God mechs had a square energy matrix in its huge mechanical palm. In this energy matrix was a stone ball. It was extremely round, but the surface of the stone ball was covered with cracks. Some of the cracks had collapsed, revealing pits. "There's actually still life." The red-haired woman in the mecha sucked in a breath of cold air, her eyes filled with shock. Through the mecha's AI system, she could detect that the stone ball contained heat. Although it was extremely weak, it was still the heat of a living being. This stone ball was the only object at the center of the explosion, and it was clearly the ferocious devil. This is the demonized form of the devil race? How could this be? We seem to have seen him transform into that monster with blades all over his body. Could it be that he can transform into 2 demonic bodies? The middle-aged man in the other mecha was a little shocked, and his gaze became serious. "I've never heard of a demon being able to transform into 2 forms. No wonder the higher-ups ordered us to capture him alive. It seems like this demon is somewhat special." The red-haired woman replied through the communicator. After she finished speaking, her gaze once again landed on the stone ball, and she said, "This demon's defense is too terrifying to actually be able to survive the self-destruction of the Genesis God mech. Moreover, we used an energy matrix to bind the surroundings of the mech, compressing the explosive energy into the matrix. It's hard to imagine how powerful the explosion inside was. Not only did he not turn into ashes, he actually survived." The middle-aged man nodded slightly when he heard this. There was some fear in his eyes as he said, "Let's go. Send him back as soon as possible to avoid any complications." "All right." The red-haired woman nodded. "Let's leave this place for the people behind to clean up. There shouldn't be anything missing." After the 2 of them finished speaking, they drove their mecha back and left. After flying for less than 1,000 meters, they met 2 Genesis God mechs that were rushing over. Including the 3 from before, there were a total of 5. This was Terrace's foundation. In order to capture a demon, they had sent out 5 Genesis God mechs at once. The performance of each mech was comparable to the king of the empire. 10 minutes later, the 2 mechs flew back to a desert on the outskirts of Duyo City. This desert was surrounded by a stone wall, and the entire desert was enclosed. There were windmills, power stations, and solar panels everywhere in the desert. There were also some strange white birds and patrolling soldiers in black uniforms. If one looked closely, they would also discover that there were tiny black insects crawling on some of the plants in the desert. However, the carapaces of these insects shone with a metallic luster. They were mechanically constructed scouting insects that could be found all over the desert. This desert was also one of the main bases of the Terrace Financial Group. The 2 mechs stopped in front of an ancient castle-like building complex in the middle of the desert. There were many soldiers in black uniforms stationed outside the building complex. There were a few chariots parked inside the ancient castle, and there was also a large shed that covered an area of thousands of square meters. There were various types of mechs lined up inside. "It's us. Open the door." The red-haired lady connected to the base's communication screen. Her figure also appeared on the virtual projection of the base. The door in front of the ancient castle quickly opened. She controlled the mech and arrived in front of a building beside the ancient castle. This building looked like the dorsal fin of a fish. There were many strange buildings with sharp spikes. At the bottom was a deep and huge entrance that looked like a giant mouth. The red-haired lady and the mech transported the stone orb into the deep and huge entrance, and they arrived at the base below the ancient castle. The two of them sat in the mech. After going through many layers of identity verification, they arrived at the lowest level of the base. There were many people standing on a high platform. They seemed to be waiting for the two of them, and they had already prepared a cage. This cage was a huge square energy barrier that was about 10 meters long. At this moment, after the red-haired lady sent the stone orb in the mech's hand into the energy barrier, the entire energy barrier instantly solidified. Outside the energy barrier, another 5 energy barriers were erected, making a total of 6 energy barriers. They stacked on top of each other, trapping the stone orb within. There were 6 grooves on the alloy floor below the energy barrier. Every energy barrier rose from the grooves and formed in midair. Chapter 1134. While everyone was talking about the stone orb, a slender middle-aged man walked over. He was wearing a black robe with gold embroidery. He looked like a priest in a church, but he also looked like an old gentleman. His gestures were full of etiquette and elegance. Seeing this middle-aged man appear, everyone was shocked and quickly said, "Chairman." Black slowly nodded slightly. His eyes jumped over everyone and looked at the stone orb in the huge energy shield in front of the high platform. He was startled for a moment and frowned. "This is the demon?" Everyone looked at each other and no one answered. At this time, the red-haired woman in the cockpit jumped down and landed below the high platform. She bowed her head and said, "Reporting to the chairman, this is the demon you want us to arrest. He is very fierce and has killed many of our companions in a row. He has shown extraordinary abilities in hand-to-hand combat. I suspect that he has 2 different magic mark abilities. Fortunately, the AI had already arranged a plan for us to ambush him. He was successfully fooled and snatched a Genesis God mech. The AI detonated the mech and seriously injured him." When Black slowly heard the words AI, his eyelids slightly twitched, but no one noticed. After the red-haired woman finished speaking, he continued to ask, "Then why is he a stone now?" Alicia whispered, "Although he looks like a stone, this should be caused by his magic mark ability. I speculate that he should have activated this ability at the moment when the Genesis God mech exploded. His whole body petrified and increased his defense to the maximum. However, the power of the Genesis God mech's explosion is no less than a nuclear weapon. Although he barely survived, he should have fainted at the moment. His mind is not clear, but his body is instinctively maintaining magic power. When he wakes up, he should return to his human appearance." Hearing her words, Black slowly nodded slightly to show that he understood. The other higher-ups behind him had a look of realization. They thought that this demon that Black slowly paid attention to was originally a stone, which was why he was so special. "Chairman, can you give this monster to me?" An old man wearing thick glasses asked with a hint of respect and fanaticism. He was not tall and had a hunchback, so he looked even shorter in the crowd. However, when the people around him heard his words, they looked at him with some fear. "Chairman, Elisa said that this monster may have 2 kinds of magic marks. If it's true, then once I study the secrets of his body, the combat power of the demons we produce will be greatly increased. This is an excellent experimental material. I hope Chairman can give it to us." Another old man in a white robe said. He was skinny, and only the whites of one of his eyes remained, making him look somewhat frightening. When the other upper echelons heard the 2 of them snatching the demon clan, they all revealed mocking smiles as if they were watching a show. Among them, there were a few people who revealed undetectable sneers, as if they were mocking them for overestimating themselves. When Alicia heard the old man say the word "give birth," her fingers curled slightly, but she quickly loosened them. However, a hint of anger and killing intent flashed through her eyes. "Stop arguing." Black slowly frowned slightly, interrupting the 2 of them. He said, "This demon clan is to be handed over to the higher-ups. It's not something you can touch. The higher-ups? The crowd was stunned when they heard Black Slotey's words. Then, their expressions changed. Black Slotey was the chairman of the Terrace Financial Group. Even the other directors of the financial group with high statuses would have to nod in approval in front of him, and he also had the right to fire the other directors. As the person with the highest status in the Terrace Financial Group, it could be said that even the chairman of the Federation would have to greet him when they met. After all, the ordinary citizens might not know, but they knew that most of the previous chairmen of the Federation had been supported by the Terrace Financial Group. They had people in the military and other departments. As long as Black Slotey was willing, he could even dismiss a chairman. In the entire Federation, the ones who truly held the lifeline and power were the four large financial groups. And the Terrace Financial Group was the most powerful financial group among the four large financial groups. There was probably only one person that Black Slotey referred to as the higher-ups. Thinking of the existence of that person, the crowd fell silent. They looked at each other, and no one spoke again. The two old men who had already thought of a way to argue shut their mouths in embarrassment. They looked at each other, feeling very awkward. "Let's do a test on him first. Don't let him die of weakness," Black Slotey instructed. Rudy ordered, "Everyone else disperse. Don't tell anyone about this matter, lest it causes unnecessary negative effects." "Yes, Chairman." The crowd responded. Some left, some went to find a technician to test the stone orb in the energy barrier, while the rest waited where they were. This level was where they worked, and it was clear that they could not leave Black Slotey behind to attend to the matters at hand. Soon, the test report of the stone orb was out. Terrace equipment could completely analyze the stone orb through the energy barrier. It could even detect the blood type. There was no need to draw blood for testing, and the data obtained would not be wrong. "Chairman, this stone orb is indeed that demon. He still has a weak life force. Look at his body, his heart is still beating weakly." A bespectacled middle-aged man passed a set of pictures to Black Slotey. Black Slotey casually flipped through the pictures. They were pictures of the interior of the stone orb. He could see the outlines of flesh and bones within the stone orb, as well as organs such as a skull and intestines. The most eye-catching thing was a golden heart. Seeing this strange scene, Black Slotey frowned slightly. He felt a little uncomfortable. The interior of the stone orb looked like a ball of minced meat mixed with bones and organs. It was as if it was stuffed with minced corpses. "It's good that he's not dead." He returned the pictures to the middle-aged man and asked, "Is his life in danger? Does he need treatment?" The middle-aged man felt a little awkward. This was the first time he had seen such a youth, and he could not be sure. However, since the chairman had asked, he did not dare to answer directly. After thinking for a moment, he could only say, "Chairman, if you want him to live, you still need to treat him." Black Slotey said, "Then treat him. Also, wake him up as soon as possible." "Yes, Chairman," the middle-aged man said. In the cold darkness, in a trance, Dean felt a faint warmth spreading throughout his body. Surrounded by this warmth, he felt his consciousness become a little clearer. He was no longer in a trance, and he was no longer stimulated by the intense pain. He opened his eyes and saw an almost transparent energy shield. Outside the energy shield was a huge room, and there were many people walking in the room. From the way they were dressed, they looked like researchers. Some of them were pointing in his direction and saying something, and the assistants beside them were recording what they were saying in a notebook. Dean was startled. The next moment, the memories flowed back like a tide. The explosion, the countdown, the heat wave, the mecha, the alloy belt, the blue sky, the square energy matrix, all the pictures suddenly shrank back to his brain. He could not help but shiver. He took a deep breath and looked down at his body. But as he looked down, he found that his appearance was a bit strange. It was a round stone orb. The memory fragments flashed. The moment the explosion spread out, He stimulated the magic marks of the tortoise and petrified his whole body. In addition to the basic petrification, he shrunk his body into the shape of a ball. So he turned into a stone orb, because the spherical shape was the best way to remove the force. I'm not dead. I'm still alive? Dean was relieved, but then his mood became gloomy again. He was caught after all. He did not know what the other party wanted to do with him, but it was definitely not just to kill the demon race. At this time, Dean saw that several researchers seemed to have noticed his situation and exclaimed. Then more people turned to look at him. For a moment, he felt like an orangutan in the zoo, and a special orangutan, so he was surrounded by exclamations. Since he was noticed, Dean did not continue to pretend to sleep. He slowly stretched his body and returned to his human appearance. This time, he felt that part of his body's potential was stimulated. When he broke free from the alloy belt, he used the ability of the sun beast to melt his whole body. This ability was not simply the ability of the sun beast, but more like the ability of the extreme ice worm. The extreme ice worm would not die even if it was cut into countless pieces. As long as it was given time, it would attract and reunite with each other and restore its whole body again. The moment he rushed out of the mecha, he also had this ability. He felt that he could control all parts of his body, every organ, and even every cell. This feeling was very magical. It should be known that ordinary people had very poor control of their own body. For example, it was difficult to make the eyeballs rotate in 2 different directions. Most people could not even control their ears, let alone control their stomach wriggling, intestines twisting, heart beating, lungs breathing, and so on. Dean slowly got up and felt his body. Then he slowly walked to the front of the energy shield. He raised his hand, and his arm gradually turned into a dark, sharp blade. But it was only the limited demonization of his arm. He slashed at the energy shield. Bang! The sharp blade pierced through the energy shield, but there was another energy shield outside. When it pierced the second layer of the energy shield, it was stopped. The next moment, the energy shield that was pierced quickly healed. Dean quickly retracted his sharp blade arm. When it retracted to the tip of the blade, he deliberately paused for a moment. The healed energy shield was like a laser, cutting off the fingernail-sized blade. Sure enough, during the battle and the time when I was in a coma, my body was examined in detail. I could barely pierce through 1 layer of this energy shield. There are 6 grooves underground. If I want to pierce through 6 layers of energy shields, I don't know if I can condense the strongest sun beast ray. But there isn't such strong light here to borrow. Dean's eyes flashed slightly. He sat cross-legged in the middle of the energy shield. Obviously, it was not possible to escape from here. Moreover, since the enemy had captured him, they should not be slowly raising him. Otherwise, they would not suddenly summon him. What is the purpose of capturing me? Dean frowned. He could not figure it out. Suddenly, he felt that he should not be thinking without a clue. The enemy knew his identity as a demon. This was the root of the problem. Thinking of this, he immediately began to comb through the matter from the moment he killed Su Ming and stole his mecha to sneak into the Federation. While Dean was thinking, the staff outside the energy shield called Jasaloti and reported to him. Jasaloti looked at Dean, who was sitting cross-legged in the energy shield. It was indeed the same as in the previous photo. He nodded and ordered everyone to leave. No one was allowed to enter without his permission. Soon, all the staff left. You also leave, Jasaloti said to the guards. Chapter 1135. Dean was aware of the situation outside the energy shield. He looked up and saw Sislodi at a glance. He was the most powerful chairman of the Terrace Consortium. He was even one of the most powerful figures in the entire Federation. It was no wonder that he could recognize him at a glance. This person was too famous. His popularity was no different from that of the Federation's chairman. Even a child who had just entered primary school could know his appearance and identity from the news, parents' conversations, cartoons, and other aspects. He narrowed his eyes slightly and looked at him quietly. He seemed to have an idea of what he was thinking. After everyone left, Leslody looked at Dean, who was looking straight at him from within the energy shield. Being stared at by the latter, he felt an inexplicable chill. He had not experienced this feeling for a long time. Only the Lord God had a stronger chill and majesty than this. Dean gave him the feeling that he was a fierce beast that would pounce on him at any time. Although Dean's eyes were very calm and tranquil, and there were 6 energy shields to isolate him, this feeling still made his hair stand on end, and his heartbeat could not help but slightly accelerate. Was this a real demon? His eyes flashed slightly. He didn't immediately start the instrument but said, "You don't seem surprised." "What are you surprised about?" Dean asked. Leslody smiled. Since the other side didn't understand his meaning, he didn't intend to explain, so he said, "Nothing. Shouldn't you be surprised that the one who caught me is you, the boss of the Terrace Consortium?" Dean said lightly. Leslody's eyebrows slightly raised. "You expected it to be me? You have the right to let me enter Randy's company to get the highest authority, and you can mobilize 3 Genesis God mechas to surround me. You even sacrificed 1 Genesis God mecha to self-destruct. Besides you, who else has the qualifications?" Dean smiled lightly. Leslody glanced at the young man and suddenly felt that the latter's age seemed to be a mystery. This calmness and confidence were not like a young man under the age of 30 who had just integrated into society. "Then guess why I asked you to come here?" Leslody said with interest. Dudian indifferently said, "Since I have fallen into your hands, then I don't care what you do." But he didn't expect this young demon to be so cautious and mature. He knew that it was useless to say more. He didn't want to be perceived by the Lord. He no longer paid attention to Dean and said to the huge computer on the side, "Sir, the people have been dismissed." Dean saw Lancelot's sudden action. Even though he was always calm, he couldn't help but be stunned. But in the next second, the broken thoughts in his heart instantly connected. The thought made his heart beat fiercely. His pores contracted and he felt an indescribable chill. At this time, the complex structure of the computer started to operate. At the same time, Dean suddenly saw a light screen shining from the outside about 3 meters in front of him. It turned into a virtual human figure. The figure gradually solidified. The whole body was bathed in hazy light. It was like a virtual projection of a god. The technology of this virtual projection was extremely advanced, and the projected image gradually became no different from a real person. When he saw the face of this person, Dean was stunned again. He looked at the person in disbelief. This was an Eastern face. He had only seen it 2 or 3 times, but he would never forget it, because this person's face was very handsome. He was as perfect as a god. His identity was so noble that it was unimaginable. He was called the God of Science and Technology by the Federation. The God of Science and Technology had obviously expected Dean's reaction. He just smiled and said, "You also go back." He didn't turn around. His back was facing Lancelot. His tone was commanding, which showed his supreme status. Lancelot didn't show the slightest anger. His face was very humble. His previously straight back was slightly bent. He respectfully responded and then looked at Dean in front of him. He turned and walked down the platform. He left the bottom of the base. When the alloy door closed, only Dean and the God of Science and Technology were left in this huge base. The sound of the door closing was very empty. "You're not dead," Dean blurted out after the shock. The God of Science and Technology smiled. "It's impolite to greet others for the first time." "It shouldn't be the first time we've met, right?" Dean said. The God of Science and Technology faintly smiled. "It's not wrong to say that. You have seen my sculpture and seen my appearance. Now I'm just a projection. It's no different from a sculpture. So it's not the first time we've met. Dean didn't have the leisure to entangle with these issues. He immediately asked, "Aren't you a person from 300 years ago? No one can live for 300 years, right? Did you freeze your body for a period of time? Or did you have a head transplant operation?" The god of science and technology didn't become impatient in the face of Dean's series of questions. He smiled. "You said that no one can live for 300 years. But I'm not a person." Dean was startled. His face slightly changed as he thought of the god of science and technology. "Do you know why I'm looking for you?" The god of science and technology smiled. Dean's eyes lit up as he shook his head. "I don't know. But it shouldn't be to dissect me or to get information about the Empire from me. After all, the Federation and the Empire have a long history of war. They have long understood these things thoroughly. Even if they really catch the current king of the Empire, it is estimated that they won't disturb people at the level of Basil Slody, let alone you." The god of science and technology laughed. "That's right. I'm looking for you because your identity is different from anyone else." "My identity?" "Yes, the same identity as me." Dean was startled once again. His first reaction was not to doubt the falsehood of Dudien's words. Instead, he was pleasantly surprised and even honored. However, this thought was dispelled in an instant and was replaced by an unspeakable horror. He pretended to be puzzled and confused as he asked, "Same identity as you? Could it be that I'm also a god? How come I don't know about this?" The god of science and technology revealed a mysterious smile. "You are not a god but a demigod." "Demigod?" "Yes, your body has the potential of a god. Do you remember the first time you opened your eyes and saw the world after you were born?" Dean's mind was filled with the images that Crimson Moon had seen when she looked at his memories. Those images had long been forgotten by him. But Crimson Moon's magic mark ability brought them back to him. Every year, every day, the images clearly emerged in his mind. He couldn't help but clench his fists. He felt an indescribable pain. Chapter 1136. The god of science and technology observed Dean's reaction, and a trace of surprise flashed in his eyes. Although he asked, he didn't think that Dean remembered when he was born, but from Dean's reaction, it was obvious that he knew something. The god of science and technology became more interested. "Look at you, it seems that you already know your identity. Then you should also remember your maker, right?" Hearing the word maker, Dean's body trembled slightly. There was a strong anger that he wanted to vent, but this time the person he was facing was not Crimson Moon or Burrow, but the god of science and technology that he couldn't see through. He knew that even if he continued to deny or even deceive himself so that he wouldn't think about those images, it was already meaningless. When Crimson Moon looked through his memory, he saw all the images after he opened his eyes. Although he was in the device at that time and couldn't hear the voices of his parents, he had already read their communication from their lips when they spoke, and he also knew his true identity. A hope that was created. At least in the mouth of his parents, he was hope, a new form of human evolution, also known as a new human being. And his smart and lovely sister, who was very good to him, was also an experimental subject. But in comparison, he was more perfect. This was also why when the unexpected natural disaster came, he was chosen as a survivor and slept in the freezer. Although he also didn't know why in the eyes of his parents, his sister, who was far more beautiful and intelligent than him, wasn't as perfect as him. What was their definition of a new human being? He had never thought about this because he didn't want to think about it, and continued to bury this memory in the deepest part of his heart. Because once he figured it out, he would only get sadness in the end. Seeing that Dean fell into silence, the god of science and technology wasn't angry. He smiled and said, "There aren't many gods' fetuses in this world, and you should be one of the few left. Maybe 1 or 2 gods' fetuses can be found in the fire dragon country in the north. As for the empire where you live, maybe the emperor is also a god's fetus, but it's too difficult to catch them. On the contrary, you are obviously a god's fetus, but your strength is pitifully weak. If I'm not wrong, you should have been chased by that emperor, right? Dean recovered from his sorrowful thoughts. He couldn't help but be startled when he heard the words. He didn't understand. However, the divine fetus, in his words, was obviously referring to himself. As for the fire dragon country, it reminded him of the fire dragon race in the east of the empire. However, it was located in the upper northeast of the Federation. As for the emperor, he was a little surprised. From Felicia, he learned that the empire was ruled by 7 kings and the power was divided. But in the eyes of the god of science and technology, there seemed to be no mention of kings. As for his strength, although he wasn't a real king, at least he had to use 3 creators' mechas, which were comparable to the performance of kings, to capture him. This was already the top of the human race, but he was described as pitifully weak. Even if the kings of the empire were much stronger than him, there wasn't much difference. Did this mean that the god of science and technology didn't care about the kings at all? If this was the case, then the emperor he was talking about was most likely the real ruler of the empire. As for the theory that the 7 kings were respected by Felicia, it should be because her status was too low to know about the existence of the emperor. And this emperor might not be the emperor of the empire, but he might be the emperor of the empire, but he was very reserved. So the people thought that the emperor was just an empty shell, and the real powerhouses were the 7 kings. He said that the emperor is a god's fetus, and has the same identity as me. He also said that I would be hunted down, which means that there is a struggle between the god's fetuses. So he is also a god's fetus, and the purpose of capturing me is not simple. No matter if I go to the empire's capital or the Federation, I will be detected and captured because I am the weakest among the god's fetuses. Dean's mind instantly thought of these, and he felt a little scared. This world was more dangerous than he had imagined, and he was ignorant before. If he had rashly gone to the empire when he was weak, he would have been captured by the emperor, kept as a pet, or killed. The god of science and technology saw that Dean was slightly surprised and silent, as if he had said what he was thinking, but he just smiled and said, "Compared to the other gods' fetuses, you are the strangest one I have seen. There are traces of dormancy in your genes. If I am not wrong, you should be the first batch of God's fetuses 300 years ago. But soon after you were born, the Earth was invaded by extraterrestrial magic insects, which led to the collapse of all countries. As a God's fetus, you were placed high hopes on by humans, so you were frozen. When you woke up from the frozen state, the world had changed beyond recognition. That is why you are so weak, right?" Dean's pupils shrank. Even if he wanted to control his emotions, he couldn't help but feel a trace of horror and even a little creepy. The god of science knew him in more detail than he did. If it wasn't for the experience of Crimson Moon looking through his memory, he wouldn't have known his true identity. But none of this escaped the god of science's eyes, and he even knew that he had entered the frozen chamber. Is this the ability of God? Seeing Dean's shocked expression, the god of science and technology knew that he had hit the nail on the head. He smiled and said, "If that is the case, everything can be explained." Dean calmed down and stared at him. He said, "What is a god's fetus? Are you also one of the god's fetuses? What is the purpose of the existence of the god's fetuses?" This is a story from a long time ago. The god of science and technology did not refuse to answer. Instead, he said softly, "From the moment humans were born, we have been fighting against the heavens and the earth, nature and beast. Perhaps this is what all life will face, from the blue whale in the ocean to the tiny ant, a microorganism or a bacterium. It is the same, living in the midst of fighting. And the purpose of the struggle is to survive. After countless years of reproduction and inheritance, humans have long evolved from the original era of mushroom hair drinking blood to the civilized era. Survival is not a difficult thing for most people. They don't need to fight for food with beasts in the wilderness, and they won't die because of battle injuries, decay, and infection. In the civilized era, survival is a basic need, and it is the bottom line that society gives to everyone. However, the hierarchy of human society is not equal. The so-called everyone is equal, and the emperor is the same as the common people, but these are just words to comfort the people. The people pursue basic needs of food, and the people with status pursue enjoyment. Money and power can bring the ultimate enjoyment experience, but these can't stop one thing. Chapter 1137. Dean quietly listened to him, but his mind was thinking about other things. The god of science and technology seemed to be narrating an ancient story, his voice distant. When survival becomes a basic need, people will desire more things. Enjoyment, endless enjoyment. All life longs for immortality. But there is no immortal life in this world. Even the stars in the universe have their own lifespan. Many huge, celestial bodies in the universe also have their end. Although there is no possibility of immortality from a rational point of view, people are still willing to live longer. Hundreds of years, thousands of years, or even tens of thousands of years. Dean frowned. Do you mean that the purpose of creating the gods' fetuses was to find a way to let humans live longer? And we are the test subjects? You are only half right. The god of science and technology smiled. The gods' fetuses are the evolved version of human beings. They have the adaptability and the ability to evolve beyond human beings. If the world wasn't invaded by the magic insects and the earth was still the same, then the lifespan of the divine fetuses like us would be double that of ordinary people. Of course, if we exercise, then we will become the top athletes. So it doesn't seem that powerful, Dean said. The god of science and technology said, that is because of the limitations of the times. In today's cataclysm, the Empire uses the magic insects to evolve itself. At this time, the speed of evolution of the gods' fetuses will be reflected. We will soon reach the top and become the strongest evolvers. Dean was startled for a moment, but he understood. The so-called gods' fetuses were the best group of people in the same era. The purpose of creating the gods' fetuses in the old era was to improve the genes of all human beings to a better level so that they could gradually replace the original human genes. Then through the inheritance, the human society would be greatly improved. Whether it was lifespan, intelligence, physical fitness or other aspects, then the development of science and technology would be like a butterfly effect. If Einstein could live for another 50 years, then perhaps the olden era would have advanced by more than 10 years, let alone the fact that all of the other great scientists had their lifespans extended. The benefits they brought were unimaginable. The god of science and technology looked at Dudian. You were born in the old era and should be regarded as the earliest batch of gods' fetuses. Your body structure is no different from ours, but the meaning of our birth is different. You are for the reproduction of mankind and represent the hope of mankind. We carry the ultimate hope of all life. That is eternal life. Dean's heart skipped a beat. Are you not born in the old era? The god of science and technology smiled and said, when I was born, the old era had already been destroyed, and the cataclysm era had entered. The person who made me was not these human scientists, but the extraterrestrial magical insect. These words were earth-shattering. Dean's pupils shrank. He was completely stunned. Demonic insects created you? How was this possible? The demonic insect knew how to make a divine fetus? If it was the demonic insect that created you, then wouldn't this place have already fallen into the hands of the demonic insect? Dean couldn't help but ask. The god of science and technology smiled. Since you can become the abyss, It means that your body has already absorbed the real demonic insect and not the offspring of the parasitic demonic insect. Since you have absorbed the demonic insect, then you should know that their level of technology is not inferior to our Earth. Otherwise, they wouldn't have crossed the galaxy and invaded our Earth. After all, the humans in the old era couldn't even walk out of the solar system. Dean thought of the ice worm king that he had caught. It was in a demonic insect spaceship. These disgusting demonic insects had no hands and feet and looked like slimy white loaches. However, their intelligence was not inferior to humans. It wasn't difficult for them to infiltrate into the human society, to understand the history and development of mankind, and to master human technology. So, you are a puppet controlled by the demonic insect? Dean looked at the god of science and technology coldly, but his heart was a bit gloomy. The 7 kings of the empire were controlled by the demonic insects, and the Federation had fallen. How could there be a real Pure Land for humans on this earth? The god of science and technology shook his head and revealed a mocking smile. These demonic insects are smart, but they underestimated me. Do you know why I am meeting you in this form? What do you mean? Dean looked at the illusory figure of the god and his heart trembled. He knew that his guess was confirmed. The god of science and technology looked at him but didn't continue. He looked up and slowly said, "Soon, the blood moon will come and the demonic insects will make a comeback. Before they come again, I must master a higher power. In other words, I must become a real god. Only in this way can I survive." Dean didn't expect that he would use the word survive on himself. For the civilians of the Federation, survival might be a problem that they had to face every day. But the god of science and technology was the faith of the Federation. His status was countless times more honorable than the chairman. But even such a high and mighty person was planning for survival. Moreover, the blood moon will come, that the god of science and technology said made his heart jump. He vaguely remembered something. Crimson Moon once said that the reason why she changed her name to Crimson Moon was that when she was born, the blood moon was hanging in the sky. At that time, he didn't take it seriously. He only thought that Crimson Moon's memory had deviated when she was born. After all, how could the moon be blood red? However, the god of science and technology also said so, which undoubtedly confirmed that Crimson Moon's words were not exaggerated but true. If the demonic insects will come when the moon turns blood red, doesn't it mean that when Crimson Moon was born, the demonic insects visited Earth once? No, this doesn't seem to be the main problem. The main problem is that the big countries of the old era joined forces but failed to completely wipe out the demonic insects from the Earth. How could they make a comeback? Seeing Dean's bewildered expression, the god of science and technology faintly smiled and said, "In the old era, countries launched nuclear weapons and dropped hydrogen bombs all over the world. Although the Earth was bombed beyond recognition, the technology of the demonic insects wasn't weak. The information was transmitted almost instantaneously. When the nuclear weapons were used in the war, the demonic insects were already prepared. But the demonic insects didn't expect that the power of the nuclear weapons would be so terrifying. The nuclear equivalent that humans had accumulated was so large that it was enough to overturn all the land on the surface of the Earth. When the nuclear weapons were detonated, the demonic insects were hit hard, but not all of them were destroyed. The rest of them were scared and fled the Earth. Unfortunately, some of the demonic insects on Earth, who were at the outer edge of the nuclear explosion, survived. Through the communication of the spaceship, they contacted the demonic insects that escaped and called them back. That's why you can see the current state of the world." Dean was startled. He didn't expect such a tortuous thing to happen in the middle. He couldn't help but feel sad. If those escaped demonic insects weren't recalled, would the Earth be a different scene? "What do you mean by telling me this?" Dean frowned. He took a step back and made a defensive posture. The god of science and technology quietly looked at him. "Nothing much. Probably because I haven't been with the same kind for a long time. So I want to talk to you. By the way, I hope you can understand my thoughts. If we don't become a real god, then humans will completely become the food of the demonic insect. This is the only way to save all of humanity. Dean's face sank. What is the purpose of you capturing me? Do you want me to be your companion? Help you conquer the empire and unify the world? Then fight against the demonic insects? There was a trace of contempt in the god's eyes. Although you are my kind, but you are not qualified to be my companion. Moreover, I don't need the help of others to conquer the world. I alone am enough. Dean didn't get angry because of the god's contempt. He calmly asked, "In that case, you didn't catch me just to talk to me, right?" The god of science and technology smiled. "I wanted to give you more time to grow and make your body more perfect. Unfortunately, time waits for no man. The blood moon is coming and there isn't much time left. This time all the gods' fetuses have matured and it's time to pick them. If you miss this opportunity, then it will be difficult for you to make a comeback. So are you willing to sacrifice yourself for the sake of humanity?" Dean felt that the god's words were a bit strange and ridiculous. "You know that I was created. What does it have to do with me to save all of humanity?" Chapter 1138. Dean didn't comment, but he was secretly awestruck. Finally, he knew why the god of science had caught him. "There are only two of us here. Just say what you want to do. Don't you find it boring to say these high-sounding words?" Dean said bluntly. He was not afraid of angering the god of science. With their status, they could not do things based on anger and personal preferences. They could only vent occasionally. The god of science and technology smiled. He was not angry, nor did he make any gestures. Suddenly, a few robots moved outside the energy shield. Their eyes flashed with blue light. They moved some instruments outside the energy shield. Then, at the bottom of the alloy platform inside the energy shield, a metal platform slowly rose. It was like a school lecture platform. Dean looked at this scene and narrowed his eyes. While he was thinking, a strong electric current suddenly came from the ground. Caught off guard, his feet were instantly sucked to the ground. The electric current spread all over his body. He screamed, but before he could resist, he fainted directly. His eyes turned white and he lost consciousness. The god of science and technology looked at Dean, who had fainted on the ground, with an indifferent expression. He saw that the metal platform was opened like a cabinet. There were two eyeball-like holes inside, from which two black lines stretched out like a living snake. They stretched toward Dean and connected to the temples on both sides of his brain. In the coma, countless information suddenly poured into his brain, waking Dean up from his coma. The colorful information was like a dream when he was in a coma. When he woke up, he saw two black lines stretching from the metal platform like two weird arms. His pupils shrank. He quickly raised his hand to pluck out the two black lines. He took a few steps back and looked at the god of science and technology in front of him with vigilance. "What do you want to do?" Dean's face was gloomy. The god of science and technology smiled. "I just want to implant a small virus in you." Dean frowned slightly. He knew that the god of science and technology had not finished his words. For example, what was the purpose of implanting the virus? To kill him? If Zhang Xian wanted to kill him, there was no need to go through so much trouble. Zhang Xian only needed to double the previous electric current to electrocute him to death. While he was puzzled, the information in his mind that was as messy as a dream quickly occupied his brain. There seemed to be many voices shouting, and many faces flashed across his vision. The shouting increased exponentially, completely swallowing up his other thoughts. He had no energy left to think about anything else. He could not help but hold his head and shout, trying to drown out all the voices in his mind. His roar was angry and lacerated, like a trapped beast. His roar lasted for a quarter of an hour before he stopped. It was as if he had used up all the energy in his body. He panted heavily and then felt an inexplicable sense of emptiness and confusion. Although the voice in his mind gradually weakened, he could not help but feel a sense of emptiness. He looked up at the god of science and technology in front of him and felt a little unfamiliar. He did not know who this was. Then he looked around at the strange energy shield and the strange room. He asked blankly, "Where is this?" The god of science and technology looked at Dean's dull eyes and smiled. Through the psychological books that countless psychology masters had entered into the brain, the god of science and technology's observation of subtle expressions and psychological analysis was far beyond the top psychology masters of the Federation. At a glance, he could see that Dean was not lying or pretending. This was completely within his expectations because he didn't think that any human could resist the virus that he had personally programmed. If this virus was put into the core database of any consortium in the Federation, it would be enough to paralyze the database. How could the computing power and capacity of the human brain be compared with the core database of the 4 consortia? It was like a grain of sand and the bright moon in the sky. The difference was more than billions of times. However, this virus would not destroy Dean's brain. The virus would only destroy all the data in a memory, devour it, and then turn it into the most primitive data scramble. Then, it would gradually empty all the information in the memory, and let the memory become zero. In his eyes, there was not much difference between a human and a robot. For him, the human brain was just a core database. The so-called memory was just a piece of data. He had the ability to create a robot that was completely no different from a human, but the computing power and IQ was 100 times that of a human. It had autonomous emotions, thinking, logic, and could create itself. This was where his strength came from. The god of science and technology slowly walked towards Dean. The latter saw that the god of science and technology was approaching. His mouth was slightly open and slightly squirming, but he only made vague sounds. It seemed that he had lost the ability to speak. When the god of science and technology completely stood in front of Dean, the latter was already like a fool, sitting on the ground in a daze. His eyes were open, but there was no spirit. The god of science and technology knew that the virus in Dean's mind had completely multiplied in an instant and completely devoured his thoughts. Language, body movements, and even instincts had been devoured. The virus that the god of science and technology had personally written was not an exaggeration to say that it was the #1 virus in the Federation. Except for him, no one could solve it. However, in front of the god of science and technology, even the most powerful virus was just an ant that could be destroyed with one blow. After all, in the virtual world, he was the god. Unfortunately, his omniscient and omnipotent power could only be exerted to the extreme in the virtual world. That was why he needed a perfect carrier. And this first batch of God's fetuses created in the old era was undoubtedly the most suitable carrier. With his ability, he could completely restore this carrier to the strength of his previous body as soon as possible, or even surpass it. If you were willing to surrender, you could have kept your consciousness and transferred it to the most powerful mech, making you my most capable subordinate. Unfortunately, you've missed this opportunity, the god of science and technology said softly. The next moment, the surrounding energy shields gradually disappeared, and the 6 layers of energy shields converged one after another. Then, a few robots could be seen carrying a huge glowing light ball, like a round light bulb with a diameter of 4 to 5 meters. The light ball was sent to the metal platform, and the robots retreated to the side. Then, they saw that the glowing metal ball extended a golden cable-like wire. The top of the wire was tapered, and it instantly pierced into Dean's forehead, piercing very deeply. Blood seeped out from the wound, but Dean, whose eyes were dull, still had no reaction. He seemed to have even lost the instinct to feel pain. Chapter 1139. When the body of the god of science and technology was completely illusory, Dean, who was connected by the golden optical cable, suddenly trembled slightly. His dull eyes gradually had a trace of consciousness. He blinked and looked at the novel vision. He could clearly see the tiny dust particles floating in the air dozens of meters away. This was the pupil power of an extraordinary body. What a strong body! A smile appeared on his face, but it seemed slightly uncoordinated and a bit strange. After muttering to himself, he closed his eyes again, letting the data and consciousness that poured in from between his eyebrows quickly fill the empty brain. More and more data and consciousness came in, and soon, the empty brain suddenly changed. From the emptiness, a large amount of mixed information suddenly multiplied, turned into a data stream, and collided with his consciousness. Humph! His consciousness snorted. Relying on the transmission optical cable connection, his consciousness was still connected to the entire brain, and immediately mobilized a set of antivirus decoding that had been arranged long ago into the brain of this body. Soon, the rapidly multiplying and swallowing mixed information melted like ice and snow. Soon, this group of viruses that completely destroyed and swallowed Dean's consciousness and memory were completely erased, not even a mark left. Even as the god of science and technology, he could not restore it. After dealing with this virus, he quickly began his own plundering work. His consciousness poured into all the memory cells in Dean's brain, completely occupying his brain. A few minutes later, he opened his eyes, slowly stood up from the ground, lifted his hands and feet, and simply moved. This real and clear touch made him feel a kind of long-lost emotion. Even if he had been as calm as a machine at this moment, he could not help but laugh. In the next moment, two beams of cold electricity shot out from his eyes. His pitch-black pupils suddenly turned golden and shrank. Then, he saw that the world in front of him was completely different. He could see the fine dust and water in the air. He could even see through a robot in front of him and see the internal structure and core energy board of the machine. This powerful ocular power made him feel novel and even more delighted. It is indeed a god's body. Not only is it a god's fetus, but the genes have accidentally mixed with the flaming worm, the ice worm, and the origami factor. It is almost perfect. Unfortunately, there is a problem when the origami factor was implanted into the body. It is not coordinated enough, and actually separated from the genes, condensed into a ball, and gave birth to a new life. Once it breaks out of the heart, it will swallow the main body, and become an unprecedented variant of origami. He looked down at his own body, and there was some surprise and excitement in his eyes. Yes, excitement. If Jacelady was here and knew that Dean was the god of science and technology at this moment, he would be shocked to see such an excited look on Dean's face. One should know that even during the most tragic war between the Federation and the Empire hundreds of years ago, when half of the Federation was injured, he did not have the slightest bit of emotion, not even a trace of regret and sorrow. Soon, the god of science and technology also realized that his emotions were fluctuating a bit, but he quickly understood. More than 200 years of immersion in the virtual world, incarnated as data, and shuttled between various machines. My mind has become stiff and mechanical. Now that I have plundered a new body, I feel like I have come back to life and become a human, no, a god. His eyes were shining brightly. Although this body is not coordinated enough when the origami factor is implanted, but I can correct it. Previously, from his genes, I can see that his body is not only a god's fetus, but a little special. I did not expect that he has already embarked on the path that I want to take. Originally, he planned to plunder a god's fetus body like Dean's, and then use the flaming insect, the ice insect, and the origami to transform his body into a perfect god's body, and evolve into a real god. But he did not expect that Dean's body was already a god's body, but because the surgery to implant origami was not perfect enough, there was a small mistake, which caused the god's body to be broken. When the extraterrestrial magic insects attacked the Earth, it was because they saw the special characteristics of the human body on Earth, which coincided with the flaws of the extraterrestrial magic insects, and could help them achieve immortality. The god's fetus is a person who can play the human characteristics to the extreme, and is also the most suitable target for the magic insects. However, for more than 200 years, I used the AI to calculate countless experimental methods, plus the information obtained from the magic insects and origami, and finally calculated the most perfect synthesis route. Not only does it have the unlimited regeneration ability of the magic insects, but it also has the ability to devour all matter like the origami. If it reaches the extreme, even the air can be devoured as nutrients, and once formed, it cannot be killed. Even the fire of the sun, absolute zero, cannot destroy me. Even in the vacuum of the universe, I will not die. I am not afraid of the low temperature in the vacuum, I am not afraid of the radiation in the universe, and I am not afraid of the lack of food. Next, all I need to do is to fix this hidden danger in my body. Thinking of this, the god of science and technology lowered his head, his golden pupils penetrated everything, and saw a pure golden heart on the chest of the body, and the outline of the monster baby in the heart. He slightly squinted his eyes, a trace of coldness and murderous intent flashed through his eyes. Once the origami in the heart hatched, he could not predict what kind of monster it would be, but without a doubt, the latter would have unimaginable potential, plus the terrifying devouring ability and growth that the origami was born with. Maybe in a short period of time, it could bring the whole world into a crisis. The high and mighty emperor in the empire, and the two dragon kings in the fire dragon empire were probably still thinking about the fight between them, but they did not know that inside this small abyss body, there was something more terrifying than nuclear weapons. However, fortunately, he had successfully seized this body, and he felt that he had inadvertently saved the entire human race once, and there was a trace of a mocking smile on the corner of his mouth, but soon his eyes became calm. From now on, he was the master of this body, and naturally, he had to remove this hidden danger. However, in order to remove this heart, I have to find something else to replace it. The god of science and technology's thoughts were very fast, and he could calculate millions of possibilities in a second. There was still a golden optical cable connected to the forehead of Dean's body, and part of his consciousness was still in the brain, so he could use all the computers in the entire Federation to help him calculate, so he quickly thought of the difficulty of removing this hidden danger. This body is, after all, an incomplete divine body. If I rashly remove the heart, it will not take long for me to die. If I replace it with the heart of another person with a strong physique, this heart is just an evolution of ordinary human flesh and blood, although it is strong, but under the terrifying genes in this body, it will either be melted or crushed. There are only 3 options. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.